Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Gerardot couple. Jennair Gerardo was born December 19, 1970, in the city of Fort Wayne, Allen County, Indiana, USA. She spent her childhood and teenage years in the area. Jennair graduated from Bishop Luers High School, where she achieved excellent results in advanced courses. She then attended Purdue University at Indianapolis, studying communication and actively participating in the theater arts program. Later, she continued her communication studies at Butler University. Jennair earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in communication and theater arts. Throughout her career, she worked in marketing for various Indiana companies, including roles in Carmel and Indianapolis. Notably, she served as marketing manager at CIRCOR Instrumentation for several years. In the summer of 1986, Jennair met Mark Gerardot in Fort Wayne, Indiana. At the time, they were both teenagers, and Jennair was working at a local Taco Bell. Mark was immediately drawn to her, captivated by her striking blue eyes and bright smile. Mark was initially unable to express his feelings to Jennair. The romance between Mark and Jennair only really began when they met again by chance after 4 years, at a nearby shopping mall where Jennair was working. He began visiting her frequently, and one day, she encouraged him to make a move, asking him directly when he would take her out. Jennair's confidence and willingness to speak her mind drew Mark to her. He described her demeanor as the opposite of his own, admiring her boldness. Melissa Murphy, a childhood friend of Jennair's, recalled how excited Jennair was when she first met Mark, saying Jennair was convinced he was the one and would do anything for him. Mark and Jennair got married on October 23, 1993, when Mark was 25 and Jennair was 23. Their relationship, which began in adolescence, continued to flourish into adulthood. Mark reflected on their happiness together, saying he couldn't imagine spending his life with anyone else. However, like any couple, Mark and Jennair faced challenges in their marriage and had to navigate the low points together. Mark said the arguments between him and his wife were very tense, and Jennair always won because she wanted to be the one to make the final decision. Mark's high school friend, Mike Hartman, shared that although he wasn't privy to all the details of their relationship, he knew they had fierce disagreements. Despite their strong marriage, the 2008 financial crisis significantly impacted them. Mark later mentioned that it changed everything, and money became a major source of stress and arguments. In November 2011, they relocated to Greenville, South Carolina, where they found new marketing jobs. Exploring the state's beautiful landscapes brought them closer together, and their marriage experienced a renewal. However, their renewed life came to a halt in 2017. Jennair lost her job, leaving her struggling to find a new one, and she was no longer the strong, confident woman she once was. Around this time, the couple felt it was time for a change and a fresh start. They decided to move to Delaware, and Mark began looking for a job right away. He came across a job posting at the University of Delaware for a creative director in the marketing department, a role that would come with supervisory responsibilities. Mark emailed his application and quickly received a response from a woman 15 years his junior, who would be his supervisor if he got the job. She invited him for an interview. Initially, Mark was nervous about working under someone 15 years younger than him, but his worries soon disappeared after meeting Meredith Chapman. This was their first encounter. At the time, Meredith was 33 years old and originally from Pennsylvania. She had graduated from the University of Delaware with a bachelor's in communication and a master's in education. She was married to Luke, a former New York City councilman, and they lived in Fairfield Crest, Delaware, with their dog Indy. The couple had married in 2009. During his interview, Mark was immediately drawn to Meredith's beauty and intelligence. He recalled thinking, "I have to work for this person," within 5 minutes of sitting across from her. He found her articulate, energetic, and passionate about her job, and was impressed by her accomplishments at such a young age. Meredith seemed impressed by Mark, as she immediately offered him the job. Mark gratefully accepted the offer and moved to Wilmington, Delaware in November 2017. His wife, Jennair, stayed behind in South Carolina to lease out their home. Mark was excited about the new opportunity and the chance to advance his career. Unbeknownst to him, this marked the start of the demise of his marriage to Jennair. Mark spent 45 days living alone in Delaware, getting to know Meredith better. They discovered they had a lot in common, and she invited him out for a drink one evening. Mark found it easy to talk to Meredith and opened up to her about his marriage to Jennair, sharing some of his personal struggles. He also told her about the loss of his parents and brother. Mark was unaware of what was happening between him and Meredith at first. Mark stated that he really hadn't known what was happening. He admits that he feels affection for Meredith and expresses that being with her is a wonderful experience. After their dinner date, he started to understand his feelings and realized he was attracted to her. As Mark spent more time with Meredith, the issues in his marriage became more apparent. He began to compare Meredith to his wife, noting that Meredith praised him and made him feel appreciated, which was something his wife never did. Mark was really touched by Meredith's compliments. Mark was deeply attracted to Meredith, but he felt guilty about betraying his wife. As a result, he initially attempted to end his relationship with Meredith. However, he couldn't shake off the feelings he had developed for her, especially after learning that Meredith was unhappy in her own 9-year marriage. Mark explains that his relationship with Meredith is great, which made it difficult for him to shut down the relationship. He wanted to understand what drew them together. Before Jennair joined her husband in Delaware, Mark and Meredith had already confessed their love for each other. Mark felt it was natural to express his love for Meredith, as the feeling was powerful. In December 2017, Jennair moved north and noticed Mark's distant behavior. She soon confronted him, sensing that he might be involved with another woman. Jennair asked Mark what was going on with him and said that he was acting different. Jennair specifically mentioned Meredith because Mark often mentioned her when discussing new job. Although Mark initially denied the affair, Jennair continued to question him, aware that something was amiss between him and Meredith. She began to closely monitor his activities. Mark is confused as to why Jennair knows the private aspects of his affair with Meredith. Around Valentine's Day in 2008, Jennair collected evidence that her husband was having an affair. However, this came at a cost. Mark discovered that Jennair had hired a company to hack into his phone, allowing her to read his texts, view his photos, and access his call records with Meredith. Mark confessed to Jennair that he had developed feelings for Meredith, unable to continue the deception. Jennair, heartbroken but determined to save their marriage, asked Mark to attend marriage counseling with her, and he agreed. However, during their second session, Mark discovered a recording device hidden in his jacket. Initially thinking it was an anti-theft device, he realized it was actively recording him. Furious, Mark confronted Jennair. She claimed she wanted to understand the extent of his relationship with Meredith and suspected they were planning something together. This has been marked the beginning of the end for Mark and Jennair's marriage. Mark eventually told Jennair that he intended to file for divorce in May 2018, once he had met the residency requirements in Delaware and could leave their shared home. During this period, Meredith Chapman's life was on an upward trajectory. She had landed a new role as assistant vice president at Butler University in Pennsylvania and relocated to Radnor Township. Meanwhile, her marriage was coming to an end, paving the way for her to pursue a relationship with Mark. As Meredith and Mark's relationship deepened, Jennair, was Mark's wife at that time, began consulting with divorce coach Sheila Brennan. Jennair was struggling with feelings of bitterness and anger, stemming from being replaced by a younger woman. Her concerns were compounded by financial uncertainty, having moved north without securing a new job. Jennair's situation continued to deteriorate, ultimately taking a toll on her mental health. Mark noticed her distress and suggested that she see a psychiatrist for professional help. He also encouraged her to reach out to family and friends, as she had mentioned suicidal thoughts and even threatened to jump out of a window. Mark stated that Jennair appeared to have come to terms with their upcoming divorce. She walked up to him with a list of things she wanted him to do in the weeks before he officially moved out. Her requests included activities such as going on hikes, having dinner together, and generally spending quality time as a couple. Mark agreed to fulfill her requests, thinking it would help Jennair be in a better emotional state. During this time, Jennair appeared to be acting normally, although she would occasionally become emotional and break down in tears. Over the next few weeks, Jennair started posting on the app Nextdoor. She was looking for recommendations for a good marriage counselor who could help couples that were close to getting a divorce. In her post, Jennair specified that they needed a counselor with extensive education and experience in handling complex issues such as infidelity, depression, traumatic experiences, and child-parent dynamics. However, unbeknownst to Mark, Jennair had secretly been planning her revenge. On the night of April 23, 2018, Mark and his wife Jennair were scheduled to meet at a restaurant to discuss their divorce agreement. However, Jennair sent Mark a series of messages, first saying she was running late, then telling him to go home as she wouldn't make it to the. Mark got up to leave, but minutes later, he received a disturbing picture from Jennair, an image of trash with a condom in the middle. This led him to believe Jennair was rummaging through Meredith's trash can outside her home. More text messages followed, including one that said he had ruined co-life. Jennair's next messages were even more ominous, saying she hoped he never found happiness and she had said goodbye to Mark. Alarmed and fearing for Meredith's safety, Mark tried to contact Meredith multiple times, but all his calls and texts went unanswered. Worried about a confrontation between Jennair and Meredith, Mark rushed to Meredith's house. What he found was far more horrific than he had anticipated. Upon arrival, he discovered Meredith lying face down on her kitchen floor. Around her head was a pool of blood. Nearby, he also found Jennair's lifeless body on the floor. Mark shouted in shock and ran to Meredith. He said, "Baby, oh baby, what have you done?" Meredith had excitedly posted on her Instagram about her new job at Villanova less than 2 hours before she died, expressing her excitement. According to Meredith's 5:42 p.m. post, after just 1 week on the job, she's already earned the love of fans at NOA Nation. Later that evening, she arrived at her home on Lowry Lane in Radnor Township, parked her Audi in the driveway, opened the door, and walked inside, unaware that Jennair had broken in and was hiding, waiting to attack her. When Mark got there, Tim, one of Meredith's neighbors, was present. He mentioned that he heard a commotion and went out to see what happened. Mark asked him to call 911. Sergeant Christopher Four of the Radnor Township Police Department said the call made his heart sink. Sergeant Christopher said they don't usually get calls like this. When they arrived, the scene was chaotic with a lot of police present. Mark, who appeared out of breath according to Christopher, was put in an ambulance before being taken to the police station as a suspect. After questioning Mark and discovering that the gun used in the 2 deaths was under Jennair's body, the police concluded that Jennair had broken into Meredith's home, killed her, and then committed suicide. The police received a tip from witness, who claimed to see a woman in a trench coat, hat, sunglasses, and possibly a wig watching the house with binoculars. They also found a set of car keys at the crime scene that were traced to a Cadillac rented by Jennair. Mark was surprised to learn about the Cadillac. He said he learned most of this from the police and the news. Jennair had rented the car 2 weeks before the incident, and it was parked just outside their apartment. Mark continued his investigation by examining his wife's bank statements, phone records, and computer backups, discovering that she was leading a double life. After Mark confessed to his affair shortly after Valentine's Day, he found out that Jennair had opened a secret bank account and credit cards. She used these cards to buy audio surveillance equipment, a lock-picking kit, computer hacking software, and DNA testing kits for his clothes. Mark also revealed that she purchased advanced GPS tracking devices and attached them to both his and Meredith's cars. Mark stated that he had found over 400 images of private conversations between Meredith and him from text and Snapchat, and that Jennair would access his phone in the middle of the night. On March 20, 2018, 5 weeks before committing the murder, Jennair bought the gun she used in the murder and suicide. Her credit card statements showed that she practiced shooting the gun 3 times at a firing range. Mark claimed that Jennair had secretly placed several recording devices in his clothes. He discovered files containing hundreds of hours of audio recordings his wife had not only recorded but also transcribed into notebooks. According to Mark, Jennair had taken all his jackets and embedded multiple devices, constantly switching them in and out. Every day, she would remove a device, download the recorded content, and then sew it back into his jacket, repeating this process for weeks. It was revealed that on the night Jennair killed Meredith and herself, she emailed a letter to her family, chillingly explaining her motive. She had begun the letter weeks prior, dating her entries, and described how it was an act of revenge for what he had done to her, saying, "That's as simple as it gets." Dr. Robbie Ludwig, a psychotherapist who studied marriage-related homicides and Red Letter, suggested that Jennair may have been driven to kill Meredith and herself because she could not bear losing Mark. Dr. Robin commented that, in his opinion, there was something about listening to the recordings that made Jennair angry and upset. Dr. Robin went on to say that Jennair found the strength to act because she believed that her suspicions about her husband's character were correct. However, when she became suicidal and lost hope in life, she became more dangerous. It seemed that she had arranged everything to make her husband suffer. In a TV interview with Dr. Ozark, Mark shared a shocking revelation. Jennair had written a 15-page letter, confessing that if he had walked in on the crime scene, she would have killed him as well. He acknowledged that he had hurt Jennair, and his greatest regret was making her feel trapped and without options. He deeply wished he could travel back in time and erase the hurt he had caused. He confessed that his love for Jennair had remained strong and never disappeared. Mark explained that he drove by Meredith's house multiple times as a way to cope with his emotions and come to terms with what had happened, helping him to process his feelings and move on. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Michelle Williams. Michelle was raised in Hurst, a suburb of Dallas, Texas, alongside her younger sister Laura. After their mother left to pursue a better life, their father took on the responsibility of raising them. However, he struggled to provide for the family, often relying on unstable construction work and seeking solace in alcohol. In an attempt to make ends meet, Michelle's father devised and carried out schemes to obtain easy money. He would take jobs at factories, intentionally injure himself, and collect insurance payouts. Although this tactic initially worked, it was eventually exposed with the help of CCTV cameras at one of his workplaces, resulting in his arrest and imprisonment. Growing up in an environment filled with deception and manipulation, Michelle became accustomed to a life of dishonesty. She desperately sought escape from this reality, but the lies and deceit had become ingrained in her way of life, making it difficult for her to imagine an alternative. Michelle longed to grow up quickly and leave her impoverished life behind. By the age of 15, she had developed into an attractive young woman, drawing attention from both her peers and older individuals. Michelle soon discovers that she can use her femininity and charm to influence the men around her and get what she wants. As a result, she enters a series of romantic relationships with various men. At 17, Michelle drops out of school and marries 16-year-old Kenneth O'Brien, telling him she's pregnant. Kenneth takes responsibility for his young wife and unborn child, joining the army to provide for them. They move frequently, having 2 more children, but Michelle grows dissatisfied with their nomadic lifestyle and temporary military housing. After 5 years, Michelle leaves Kenneth, citing his infidelity and physical abuse as reasons for the divorce. She returns to her hometown of Hearst, portraying herself as a victim of domestic violence to garner support from relatives and friends. As Michelle rebuilds her life, she reconnects with an old classmate, Brandon, and falls in love. Brandon is smitten with Michelle and happily accepts her 3 children from her previous marriage. They were preparing to get married, but just before the wedding, Brandon became furious with Michelle. He discovered that she had not finalized her divorce from her first husband. Michelle had been afraid to discuss the divorce with her ex-husband due to his abusive behavior, and as a result, she hadn't sent the necessary documents. With the help of a lawyer, they quickly resolved the issue, and they was able to get married in 1994. Initially, their family life was peaceful and routine. Brandon focused on growing his IT company, while Michelle worked as a dental assistant. However, Michelle had bigger aspirations. She began bringing home various dental equipment and supplies. Brandon's concerns grew as he suspected something was wrong. It was later revealed that Michelle had been stealing. Fortunately, they avoided going to trial. However, this incident marked the beginning of Brandon's trust issues with his wife. When neighbors reported that cars frequently visited their house while Brandon was at work, he installed a tape recorder in several rooms. Upon listening to the recordings, he discovered that various men were visiting their home throughout the day. Brandon conducted his own investigation and discovered that Michelle's first marriage ended in divorce due to her repeated infidelities, contradicting her claim that it was her husband's abuse. Upon learning this, Brandon reached his limit and requested a divorce. Enraged that Brandon was the one to initiate the split, Michelle sought revenge while he was away at work. Brandon had a valuable saltwater aquarium with thousands of dollars worth of fish. Michelle destroyed it by pouring Comet into the tank, killing all the fish. But that was not the end of her destructive behavior. Brandon's dog, Domino, was also a victim of Michelle's cruelty. She gave the dog sleeping pills, which led to its death. However, this was only the beginning of Brandon's nightmare. Michelle's actions continued to cause harm, and Brandon eventually learned the truth about her when his marriage was ruined. What Michelle did to Brandon was not an isolated incident. Her treatment of other men was even more shocking. It was later discovered that Michelle's first child was the child of her and John Paul Ray, a high school classmate of hers. Instead of telling John the truth, Michelle convinces Kenneth O'Brien that the child is his and he is forced to marry her. For 13 years, Kenneth believed the child was his child and even paid child support from age 5 to 18. After Michelle's divorce from Brandon, she moved in with John, the father of her first child. They lived together in a common-law marriage for 8 years. However, their relationship ended abruptly when John suspected Michelle of cheating on him. Michelle confirmed she was having an affair, which led to John moving out and leaving most of her belongings behind. She then met Greg Williams, a man with a history of marital failures, having been married twice before and having a daughter named Taylor from his previous marriage to Katie. After Greg and Katie's divorce in 2003, they shared custody of Taylor and maintained a good relationship, which made a formal child support agreement unnecessary. Greg was a successful and generous man who seemed like a perfect partner for Michelle. In 2007, Greg and Michelle had a daughter named Michaela, and they got married a year later. Their marriage seemed like the epitome of the American dream, with plenty of money, children, and love. Michelle appeared to have finally achieved the life she had always wanted. Greg came from a family with strong principles and had achieved success through his own hard work from a young age. He was a sports enthusiast and a black belt in martial arts. Both Greg and Michelle owned guns, which they kept in their home in Keller. Michelle kept a silver .40 caliber pistol in a safe, while Greg stored his black LAA .45 caliber gun, always loaded, in a case under his bedside table. Despite their differences, they was committed to making their marriage work. They regularly hosted birthday parties for their children from previous relationships at their home in Keller. Michelle's adult children frequently hosted barbecues and pool parties at their home, which was always filled with friends. Despite their idyllic suburban life and bright daughter, Michelle and her husband Greg didn't fit the traditional American couple mold. They had met through an online forum for those interested in bondage, domination, sadism, and masochism, and their raucous adult gatherings had drawn numerous complaints from their neighbors. On October 13, 2011, at 4:40 a.m., an emergency call was made by a frantic woman, claiming she and her husband had been attacked by an intruder. She reported being injured and her husband shot. Police quickly arrived at the scene, discovered a blaring television and a baby sleeping on the couch inside the house. Michelle's daughter was fast asleep and unharmed during the incident. However, Michelle's behavior raised suspicions among the police officers who arrived at the scene. Despite claiming to have just experienced a burglary and assault, Michelle appeared remarkably calm and composed. Her hair was styled, and she was fully dressed, which seemed inconsistent with her story. The police soon cordoned off the entire gated community and thoroughly searched the home. As the investigation progressed, Michelle was taken to the Keller Township Police Station for further questioning. Over several hours of interrogation, her account of the events began to unravel. Michelle initially claimed that an intruder, dressed in black, had struck her on the head with a wrench. She alleged that she fell to the ground but remained conscious and heard a gunshot. According to her, the intruder then fled through the back door. However, the evidence at the scene contradicted her story. Greg Williams, the victim, was found shot in the head while lying in bed. A .45 caliber handgun and a wrench were discovered near the back door, but the circumstances suggested that Michelle's account was not entirely credible. The investigation found no fingerprints on the weapons and no signs of forced entry. The family's valuables, including a large sum of cash, were left untouched. Security footage revealed that the only car to enter the gated community before the crime belonged to a newspaper delivery person. Michelle attempted to mislead the police by fabricating a story about the attack. She even went so far as to injure herself with a wrench and stage the scene. However, detectives noticed inconsistencies in her account. The discovery of the gun used in the crime, devoid of fingerprints, further raised suspicions. The final discrepancy was the untouched $20,000 in cash, which Michelle couldn't explain. While Michelle was unable to provide a reason for why her husband, a successful businessman and devoted father, would take his own life, she was able to justify her own actions. Michelle claimed she wanted to protect their young daughter from the painful truth about her father's death. She told the police that she had cleaned the gun and washed her husband Greg's hands to remove fingerprints, and then staged a fake home invasion before calling for help. This explanation seemed strange, but it explained why no evidence of an intruder was found. Michelle also admitted to using bleach to clean up the crime scene and hitting herself in the face with a wrench to make the attack look more believable. From the start, the police in Keller suspected that Michelle's story was not true, but at the time, they did not have any physical evidence that linked her to the crime. Michelle was arrested for lying to the police, but she was later released. Around 5 p.m. on the day of her husband's murder, Michelle visited her sister Laura's home. During the evening, Michelle cried occasionally, but her sister felt that Michelle's tears seemed insincere. Notably, Michelle didn't mention her late husband's name once. The next morning, When questioned by police, Michelle appeared to be in a great mood. She was well-dressed, had styled her hair, and was wearing makeup. Despite the ongoing investigation into her husband's death, Michelle went out for breakfast at a popular restaurant. As investigators struggled to find a motive and credible evidence, Michelle inadvertently provided them with both. During her initial interrogation, Michelle claimed she wasn't interested in money. However, her actions after Greg's death told a different story. She quickly began selling off assets from their family businesses and spending large sums of money. Michelle had been cashing checks through her husband Greg's IT company, but the exact amount is unknown. It is likely that the amount was substantial. After selling the Blueberries frozen yogurt store in Keller, Michelle made a crucial mistake. She attempted to claim the payout on Greg's life insurance policy, for which she was the sole beneficiary. The policy was taken out on August 12, 2011, nearly 2 months before Greg's death. However, Michelle overlooked a key detail: the policy did not cover Greg's death since he had taken his own life. As a result, the insurance company denied her the $60,000 payout, which was the primary motive for the crime. Later, another financial irregularity came to light that raised suspicions about Michelle. It was discovered that she had used falsified financial documents to secure a mortgage loan for the house that she and Greg were planning to buy before his death. The account numbers had been intentionally altered, and the lender did not immediately detect the elaborate scheme. Following Greg's death, Michelle canceled a meeting with the mortgage company, and the fake account went undiscussed until it caught the attention of the police. Despite the scrutiny, Michelle felt confident in her ability to avoid consequences and wrote a check for $188,000 to attorney Kenneth Wincorn. She then took a week-long vacation to Grapevine with her children. During a 3-month investigation into Greg Williams' death, police uncovered a web of deceit spun by his wife, Michelle. An autopsy revealed that Greg was shot from a distance of 12 to 18 inches. A toxicology report also showed that Greg had a large amount of sleeping pills in his system at the time of his death. Further investigation found no evidence of a break-in or assault on the house. Instead, police determined that Michelle had sedated her husband, turned up the TV volume, and shot him from close range. Their daughter was asleep in her room and did not hear the shooting. On November 3, 2011, the Tarrant County Medical Examiner officially ruled Greg's death a homicide. Michelle Williams was arrested on January 9 while on her way to a fitness center. She was charged with murder, tampering with evidence, and providing a false statement to police. As the sole witness and suspect, Michelle's bail was set at $522,000. However, she spent only a week in custody before being released on a reduced bail of $85,000. Michelle walked out of jail wearing gym clothes and a GPS monitor, accompanied by her new attorney, Kenneth Wincorn. However, this news infuriated Kathy, Greg's first wife, as she had paid Wincorn with money from Greg's estate, which she believed should not be used to defend Michelle, who was accused of killing Greg. According to online court records, Kenneth Wincorn's law firm had handled Greg and his ex-wife Kathy's divorce in 2003, and his name appeared on documents related to the custody agreement for their daughter Taylor in 2008. However, Wincorn later provided evidence showing his company, rather than him personally, had handled Greg's divorce case, which cleared him of the accusations that he had colluded with Michelle. Kenneth Wincorn learned of Greg's murder from an IT company employee. He described the news as shocking. Later, Michelle sought his help after her attempt to profit from Greg's death failed. Michelle changed her name to Shelley and presented herself as a fitness guru on Facebook. She publicly revealed her relationship with Gene Wallace, a friend of her oldest son who is nearly 15 years younger than her. Shelley and Gene opened a fitness club in Bedford and actively promoted it online. Michelle spent the next few months attending court hearings, enjoying her new relationship, and participating in fitness classes while wearing a GPS-tracking ankle bracelet. Her courtroom attire often included miniskirts, knee-length boots, and revealing blouses. According to Greg's ex-wife Kathy, Michelle never showed any signs of mourning Greg's death. Rob Conover, a friend of Greg's for over 20 years, attended many of Michelle's hearings. He observed how Michelle skillfully manipulated police officers, portraying herself as an innocent woman in need of protection. On October 9, 2013, 45-year-old Michelle took a plea deal, pleading guilty to tampering with evidence and deadly conduct. Michelle Williams has been sentenced to 18 years in prison for tampering with evidence and engaging in deadly, dangerous conduct. This is a third-degree felony that is only recognized in a few states. Initially, Michelle admitted to cleaning the gun and her husband Greg's body, but the lack of her DNA at the scene raised doubts about the first-degree murder charge. The trial of Michelle Williams, also known as Keller's Black Widow, has begun. Prosecutors allege that she intentionally targeted her husband in 2011 to collect on his substantial life insurance policy. They described the crime as a clearly planned scheme motivated by greed. According to prosecutors, Michelle drugged her husband with sleeping pills and then shot him in the head to collect the insurance payout. Michelle admitted to cleaning the gun and Greg's body, but the lack of her DNA at the scene raised doubts about the first-degree murder charge. In a statement, Michelle's attorney, Kenneth Wincorn, highlighted the challenges in the case due to the thoroughly cleaned crime scene. If the jury finds that Michelle tampered with evidence and cleaned up the crime scene, she could receive a life sentence. During the trial, prosecutors stated that in the hours preceding the violent death, Greg Williams had a heated argument with his wife over financial issues. The altercation escalated to the point where he slapped her for spending a significant amount of money intended for a house down payment. In contrast, Michelle Williams' defense team claimed that Greg Williams took his own life. Defense attorney Clay Graham added that Greg Williams frequently struggled with depression and was known to use sedatives and steroids regularly. Michelle Williams' husband, Greg, was found dead with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Michelle stated that she attempted to cover up the incident to shield her 4-year-old daughter from the truth. Throughout the court hearings, Michelle maintained a composed appearance but showed some emotional response when presented with photographs of her deceased husband. Michelle planned to blame Greg's ex-wife for the crime, claiming it was due to custody disputes. However, this plan was flawed as there were no actual disputes. Michelle's adult son testified against her, revealing she had asked him to assist in framing Greg's ex-wife. After many hours of deliberation, the jury found Michelle guilty of tampering with physical evidence, a felony offense. She received a harsh sentence, 60 years in prison, with the stipulation that she must serve at least 30 years before becoming eligible for parole. Michelle has not expressed remorse for her actions and continues to evade full responsibility for her crimes. She is currently serving her time at Mountain View Prison in Gatesville, Texas. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Vicki Roberts. Vicki Roberts was born in September 1984 in Northwest England, where she was raised in a traditional and devoutly religious family. She was the younger of 2 daughters and was raised with strong Christian values. She attended a Christian school, where she also developed her musical talents and sang in the choir. Those who knew Vicki described her as a kind, friendly, and helpful person who was always willing to lend a hand. After completing high school, Vicki enrolled in university and took a part-time job at an IKEA store to support herself. It was there that she met Michael Roberts, and their initial friendship eventually blossomed into a romantic relationship. Michael was only a year older than her. Like Vicki, Michael balanced his studies with a part-time job at IKEA and made time for sports. He was also careful about his appearance and made a good impression on those around him. Vicki was initially put off by Michael's bold and outgoing personality, but she soon found herself developing strong romantic feelings for him. Michael was born in June 1983 in Warrington, Cheshire, to a family of modest means. His father was a successful chemical engineer who expected a lot from his two sons, particularly Michael, the eldest. As a result, Michael grew up with high ambitions and a strong sense of purpose. He was a diligent student and developed into a driven and accomplished individual. Michael was a social butterfly with many friends and was often the life of the party. However, he took the most pride on the love front. With his good looks, sense of humor, and charming personality, Michael was a catch. He was also intelligent and well-read, able to hold his own in conversations on a wide range of topics. Michael's parents had instilled in him the idea that he was exceptional, praising his intelligence, beauty, and potential for success. However, this upbringing may have also fostered narcissistic tendencies. Despite this, Michael felt a deep-seated need to live up to his parents' expectations and be the perfect son, driving him to strive for their approval. Michael had a series of brief relationships and frequently dated multiple people simultaneously. He was confident in his charm and enjoyed the thrill of pursuing women who seemed out of his reach. For Michael, this was a game, a challenge to be won. Vicky is one of the challenges he wants to conquer. She was a modest and unattainable woman who initially kept Michael at arm's length, refusing even casual invitations. Vicky was focused on her studies and spent her free time at church, leaving little room for dating or relationships. Michael, however, was determined to win her over. It took Michael a few months to win Vicky over, but eventually she agreed to go out with him. He had charmed her with his sweet gestures, flowers, gifts, and thoughtful surprises. He even invited her to meet his parents, who immediately took a liking to her and approved of their son's choice. Vicky was convinced that Michael was genuinely interested in her, so she gave in to his advances. He became her first serious partner, and she felt truly happy when she was with him. It seemed like fate had brought them together. Michael also appeared to be in love and ready to settle down, but their happiness was short-lived. From the outside, their relationship seemed perfect. They were both young, attractive, and full of energy and ambition, with big plans for the future. Vicky soon discovered that Michael had a strong and adventurous approach to sex, with a high sex drive and a desire to try new things in the bedroom. At first, Michael didn't pressure Vicky to engage in certain activities, fearing she would leave him. However, once he felt secure in their relationship, he revealed his true desires. Vicky, a modest and religious person, was shocked but deeply in love with Michael and trusted him, keeping their private life a secret. Things took a turn when Michael proposed to Vicky, and she happily accepted, believing that marriage would bring an end to his experimental behavior. However, her closest friend began to notice Vicky covering up bruises and marks under her clothes. When confronted by her friend, Vicky initially denied any wrongdoing by Michael but eventually confessed that the marks were a result of Michael's affinity for bondage, toys, and other devices during their intimate moments. Vicky confided in her friend that she and Michael had intimate relations up to 5 times a week. Michael considered himself a skilled lover, viewing intimacy as an art form and the means of self-expression. Although he would occasionally compromise when Vicky refused to participate in his more extreme and reckless experiments, he usually managed to persuade her to give in to his desires. After graduating, Vicky became pregnant unexpectedly and decided to change careers. She soon landed a job as an account manager at a logistics company. Michael also left his job at IKEA and became a sales consultant at a large electronics retailer, selling phones, laptops, and other gadgets. Thanks to his charisma and persuasive abilities, he consistently exceeded his sales targets and quickly became one of the top-performing employees. Michael's success led to a promotion to senior sales, and he was being considered for a transfer to the company's main office. However, he needed to undergo additional training to improve his qualifications first. Michael enjoyed the training sessions and business trips to London, and he took great pride in his accomplishments. As a result, he often forgot about Vicky, his young fiancée, and only remembered her when he wanted intimacy. Vicky and Michael's relationship was lacking in several ways. They rarely spoke about each other or spent time together outside of the bedroom, making Vicky feel invisible to him. Meanwhile, Michael was secretly having affairs with co-workers, clients, and casual acquaintances. During this time, Vicky discovered she was pregnant and shared the news with Michael, expecting him to be thrilled and expedite their wedding plans. Instead, he was furious and insisted that she terminate the pregnancy, citing their youth and the fact that they had their whole lives ahead of them. Vicky was shocked and refused to consider abortion. Michael then attempted to persuade Vicky by appealing to her concerns about her family. He claimed that her parents, who were deeply religious, would be angry and disappointed in her for becoming pregnant out of wedlock. However, Michael promised that if Vicky agreed to have an abortion, they could keep and plan to have children after they were married. Vicky was faced with a tough decision, but Michael's persistence eventually won her over, and she went to the hospital. Unfortunately, the experience was complicated, and Vicky had to stay in the hospital for a few days. It took her nearly 3 weeks to recover. During this time, her doctor strictly advised her against intimate relationships. When Michael found out, he became furious. It was then that Vicky realized Michael had mental health issues and an addiction to sex. Without intimacy, he became unbearable, frequently leaving the house, citing urgent work matters. Vicky suspects Michael is having an affair, and she hoped that getting married would help him change his ways and be more committed to their relationship. As it turned out, their relationship was loveless, and Michael was leading a double life. Their 2-year engagement was just a convenient arrangement for him, as he had a loyal partner waiting for him at home, taking care of the household, while he maintained a string of mistresses on the side, which he frequently replaced. Vicky always trusted Michael and forgave him whenever he cheated, as long as he promised it wouldn't happen again. However, as time passed, Vicky began to pressure Michael into getting married, as she wanted to start a family and have children. Her parents also brought up the topic frequently, but what really pushed Michael to consider marriage was the insistence of his own parents, whom he didn't want to disappoint. Michael's parents adored Vicky, thinking she was perfect for their son. They constantly asked and they would tie the knot and give them grandchildren. With the help of his parents, Michael and Vicky organized a grand wedding, complete with a white dress, limousine, and a beautiful ceremony. The newlyweds appeared to be in love and happy, with a long life ahead of them. After the wedding, they settled into a large, cozy house in a prestigious area of Warrington, close to Michael's parents. Despite their marriage, Michael didn't truly love Vicky. It was more of a way to appear normal to others. Vicky never expressed her concerns about Michael's unusual behavior and frequent infidelity, allowing him to freely change partners. Meanwhile, Michael's career was thriving. He received a promotion and a significant salary increase after being transferred to a new office. His direct supervisor was Carrie Hall, the head of administration at Phones for You. Carrie was a decade older than Michael, divorced, and raising her son independently. Despite her tough exterior, she was attractive, well put together, and strong-willed, as her position demanded. For a while, she ignored Michael's subtle advances, but to him, her indifference was a signal to take action. Michael set out to win over Carrie, using his natural charm and eloquence to capture her attention. After about a month, Carrie reciprocated his interest, and they began a regular affair, meeting in hotel rooms. Their relationship was intense and passionate, with a focus on experimentation and exploration. Carrie, a confident and mature woman, was flattered by the attention of the younger Michael. She was aware that Michael was unlikely to end his marriage for her. Michael, on the other hand, was eager to explore his desires with Carrie, which he felt he couldn't express with his wife. He would often lie to his wife about working late or attending corporate events, while confiding in Carrie about his unhappy marriage and his desire to divorce. However, he never made any concrete moves to end his marriage. The affair lasted for over a year, with Carrie seemingly content with the arrangement. She made no demands for Michael to leave his wife and was satisfied with their clandestine meetings and the excitement they brought. Carrie's behavior changed as she started dressing more conservatively, covering her body with long sleeves and high-necked clothing, a departure from her usual style that highlighted her athletic build. Carrie confided in her close friend about her lover Michael's extreme intimate experiments, which often crossed a line. She showed her friend the evidence, a bite mark on her chest and bruises on her neck from his intense grip. There were also marks on her wrists from the ropes he used to tie her up, giving him complete control. The friend was alarmed and urged Carrie to report the incidents to the police, but Carrie refused, explaining that the acts were consensual and Michael usually warned her about what he was going to do. However, the intensity of the experiences often got out of hand. For instance, Michael enjoyed choking his partner, claiming it would enhance the experience, but there were times when Carrie lost consciousness due to his excessive enthusiasm. Carrie's friend was fearful of Michael's strangulation games, but Carrie consistently gave in to his persuasion, believing that he would eventually stop or that she would become desensitized to the experience. Sadly, neither Carrie nor any of Michael's mistresses made any attempt to stop his cruel and painful experiments. Vicky had suspicions about her Michael's infidelity even before they got married. She believed that her love and care could change him and make him a devoted family man. However, after the wedding, his cheating continued and even worsened. When Michael denied his infidelity, Vicky decided to investigate on her own. One night, while Michael was asleep, Vicky checked his phone and found numerous intimate conversations with other women, including Carrie. She was shocked to discover that Michael had exchanged explicit photos with some of these women. The discovery was devastating for Vicky, and she packed her bags and temporarily moved in with a friend. Vicky kept her situation a secret from her family, fearing their reaction. She was afraid that her religious relatives would pressure her to get a divorce if they found out about Michael's adultery. Despite her heartbreak, Vicky still loved Michael and didn't want to give up on their marriage. Before leaving, she wrote him a heartfelt letter, confessing her love and telling him that he was the most important person in her life. Michael's wife had finally had enough of his promiscuous and decided to leave him. Before she went, she wrote him a handwritten note explaining that she knew about his cheating and couldn't take it anymore. She left the note on the refrigerator and gave him time to think about his actions, but made it clear that she wouldn't file for divorce just yet. Despite his wife's departure, Michael didn't seem to be particularly upset or remorseful. However, he did realize that he would miss having a quiet and submissive partner who took care of the household and tolerated his behavior. He decided to try to win her back and followed her to her friend's house, bringing a large bouquet of flowers. He apologized and begged her to return, promising to be faithful from then on. His wife, Vicky, wanted to believe him and decided to give him another chance. For a while, Michael made an effort to be more considerate and even came home for dinner. He deleted his correspondence with his mistress, Carrie, and changed his social media password to avoid suspicion. However, Michael's good behavior didn't last long. He soon started pursuing a new female employee, Karen Wilson, who was engaged to be married. Despite her initial reluctance, Michael persisted in his pursuit of her, and they began an affair. Meanwhile, he continued to see Carrie on the side, juggling multiple relationships at once. He became infatuated with a new woman and ended his relationship with 33-year-old Carrie Hall after 2 months, as he had grown tired of her. He told Karen a fabricated story about being unhappy in his marriage and claimed he was willing to leave his wife for her. Karen believed him, and they had an intimate encounter in the office. A week later, she ended her engagement, expecting Michael to follow through on his promise. Michael had no intention of divorcing his wife, Vicky, but he wanted to keep his new mistress. To keep her happy, he lied to her, telling her that he had already filed for divorce and was living with his parents. However, Vicky soon became suspicious that Michael was still cheating on her. She decided to take action and gathered evidence of his adultery. While Michael was in the shower, Vicky took his phone but found nothing incriminating because he had deleted all his text messages and changed his social media password. Undeterred, she waited until he fell asleep and then took his work laptop, where she found his social media account still logged in. There, she discovered messages between Michael and his new girlfriend, in which he professed his love and claimed to be divorcing Vicky and living with his parents. Vicky was shocked and took screenshots of the messages as proof of Michael's infidelity. She also found receipts for hotel rooms in his wallet. The next morning, she confronted Michael, presenting him with the evidence adultery. For the first time in their relationship, she lost her temper. Michael was taken aback and tried to apologize, promising it would never happen again. However, Vicky threatened to tell his parents about his infidelity, hoping they could talk some sense into him since she couldn't. Michael was enraged by his wife Vicky's threat to tell his parents about their problems. In a fit of anger, he slapped her. Vicky then got up and said she would go to his parents immediately, heading for the door. Michael caught up to her, grabbed a heavy jewelry box from the dresser, and hit her in the head twice, knocking her unconscious. He then strangled her with his bare hands until she stopped breathing. Feeling no remorse, Michael wrapped Vicky's body in a blanket, placed it in large garbage bags, and carried it to the garage. He quickly cleaned the house, packed up most of Vicky's belongings, and removed them. He then invited his lover, Karen, over, and they had dinner, had fun, and made love in the same bedroom where the murder had taken place. The next day, Michael ran off with Karen. He told his parents that Vicky had left him for another man, even showing them fake messages from Vicky's phone, which he had sent himself. He went to his parents' home, sobbing on his mother's shoulder, pretending to be distraught over his wife's supposed infidelity. Michael sent his parents-in-law messages saying that their daughter had left him for another man. He also told them to give her space and not to bother her. The messages claimed that Vicky had fallen out of love with Michael and had moved in with someone else. Her parents were shocked and tried to contact Vicky to hear her side of the story, but she refused to answer their calls, only responding with messages asking for time. Vicky's parents found Michael's story suspicious and went to his house to confront him. However, his explanation only raised more questions. They soon discovered that Vicky had not shown up for work, which further alarmed them. They decided to report their concerns to the police, leading to an investigation. On December 1, 2009, Michael bought a shovel, rope, rags, and cleaning supplies from a hardware store. However, the police arrived at his house on the same day. He had been caught before he could dispose of a body. The police initially found nothing out of the ordinary, but Michael's actions and alibi sparked suspicion and raised several questions. Notably, they overlooked a large package in the garage during their search. Inside the house, they found no signs of her presence, such as clothes, documents, or personal items, which could suggest she had left of her own accord. However, Vicky's laptop was discovered in the bedroom, and upon seizing it, the police found screenshots of Michael's incriminating conversations with his mistresses, which Vicky had saved. The investigation took a significant turn when authorities made a geolocation request to Vicky's cell phone, which had been regularly sending messages to her husband and relatives. To everyone's surprise, the phone was found to be located in the marital home of Vicky and Michael. This led to a second, more thorough search of the Roberts residence. During this search, a suspicious package was discovered in the garage, and its contents shocked all who were present. However, in a stunning twist, Michael, who had been cooperating with the police, suddenly vanished into thin air. He had taken a wallet containing cash, which allowed him to evade capture for several days. After his money ran out, Michael turned to one of his mistresses, Lavinia T., and asked if he could stay with her for a while. However, when Lavinia heard on the news that Michael was wanted for his wife's murder, she immediately contacted the police and reported his whereabouts. Eventually, he was arrested, put on trial, and convicted. When the authorities arrived to arrest Michael, he claiming he was innocent of the crime. A man claimed that his wife died accidentally during a consensual sex game where she asked him to strangle her with a rope belt, but he lost control. However, forensic experts disputed this claim, finding that she was actually strangled with bare hands, attacked from behind, and had 2 severe head injuries that occurred before her death, which were unrelated to the alleged sex game. The trial began in January 2010, with the defendant, Michael Roberts, maintaining that his wife's death was an accident and hoping for a lenient sentence. However, the autopsy results revealed a different story. Roberts had intentionally hit his wife on the head twice, then strangled her, and hidden her body in the garage. As a result, Roberts was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Lily James. Lily was born in the coastal town of Sainsbury, New South Wales, Australia in May 2002. She was the first child of the close-knit James family and was especially loved by her maternal grandmother, Barbara. Growing up, Lily spent much of her time by the ocean with her younger brother Max, where she developed a passion for swimming and an active lifestyle. Her father, a water polo coach at an Anglican girls' school in Hustville, encouraged her interest in the sport. Those who knew Lily remembered her as a friendly and outgoing person who excelled in her studies and was always willing to help those in need. Her well-rounded personality made her a standout student, and she was widely respected by her peers. With her impressive talent and dedication, Lily succeeded in multiple areas, including academia, sports, and community service. She was also an accomplished performer, participating in her school's theater and dance club. Eventually, Lily's talents caught the attention of organizers from the prestigious Woodford Folk Festival, one of Australia's largest annual events, attracting over 125,000 attendees from around the world. As part of the celebrations, Lily performed a unique monologue from William Shakespeare's Macbeth. Her performance showcased her impressive skills, charisma, and stage presence, earning her a standing ovation and the jury's approval. She achieved second place in the theater category, a remarkable achievement that earned her recognition and a significant prize. In 2018, Lily achieved another milestone when she passed her beginner's driving test. Her athletic talents also flourished, particularly in water polo, a sport she began competing in professionally, following in her father's footsteps. She won the title of swimming champion in the under-17 category, a feat that delighted her parents. By her final year of school, Lily had decided to pursue a career in sports, and in 2020, she enrolled at Sydney Technological University to study sports business management. A turning point in her life. In early 2021, she started a new chapter. To break up her college routine and gain teaching experience, she took a job as a water polo coach at St. Andrew's Cathedral School. Her youthful energy, vibrant personality, and passion for sports quickly won over her colleagues, the school administration, and the students she was coaching. The students looked up to her and tried to meet her high standards. In return, she sought to understand each student's unique needs and strengths. That's when she met Paul, the new cricket and hockey coach. His impressive skills and charismatic presence quickly made him the center of attention. As a part-time teacher at another school and a member of the University of New South Wales hockey team, Paul was a driven and accomplished young man. He was particularly popular among the female students and staff. However, opinions about him were divided. Some saw him as arrogant and stubborn, while others appreciated his positive qualities. Initially, Lily and Paul's interactions were friendly but brief, limited to exchanging greetings. Over time, their relationship evolved into something more. Lily's friends reported that Paul asked her out on a date, and she found it difficult to say no due to his charming smile. The date had a profound impact on both of them, leading to a decision to meet again. As Lily got to know Paul better, she began to develop feelings for him, unaware of his true nature. Her kindness and openness made her vulnerable to falling in love. Paul appeared to return her affection, frequently complimenting her, giving her flowers, and planning evenings together. They decided to keep their relationship a secret, especially from the students at school. Lily and her boyfriend, Paul, had agreed to keep their relationship private, adhering to the school's policy and Lily's personal preference for discretion. However, as time passed, rumors about their relationship began to circulate, evolving from hushed whispers to open discussions. When Lily discovered that Paul was the one who had revealed their relationship, she felt deeply hurt and betrayed. Paul's portrayal of her had also led to criticism and judgment from others, causing Lily to feel humiliated. As a result, she confronted Paul about his actions and ended their relationship. Despite Paul's subsequent attempts to apologize and reconcile, Lily remained resolute in her decision. She took some comfort in the fact that their relationship had been brief, allowing her to see Paul's true nature before things escalated further. Paul was born in 1999 in the Netherlands to a wealthy and influential family. When his father's job required a relocation to Australia in 2015, Paul and his family made the move. As an only child, Paul received excessive attention and care from his parents, which significantly contributed to his character development. Unfortunately, this upbringing led to Paul growing up with an entitled and self-centered attitude. Paul was a high-achieving student who excelled academically, athletically, and was physically fit. After moving to a new location, he attended St. Andrew's Cathedral School, where he joined the cricket team and quickly gained recognition and respect from his peers for his exceptional skills. He eventually became the team captain and actively participated in organizing extracurricular activities and festivals. While he was well-liked by many, particularly they who found him charming, some of his male peers were put off by his confidence and boasts about his ability to win over any girl. Despite this, Paul's charm and charisma earned him many admirers. After graduating in 2017, the school administration offered him a position as an assistant coach for cricket and hockey, which he gladly accepted. He quickly took on a leadership role and successfully managed these sections, feeling confident in his abilities. However, by early 2018, he surprisingly resigned and returned home with his family, citing unknown reasons for his departure. Back home, Paul decided to further his education and earned a master's degree in sports management. Paul had a conversation with old friends and mentioned that he had improved his coaching skills, which led to a job offer from his former employer. He returned to Australia and started working at the familiar school in early 2020. To reduce living expenses, Paul agreed to share an apartment with a friend in Kensington, a suburb of Sydney. Initially, they enjoyed each other's company, socializing after work. However, a few months later, they had a disagreement, and Paul decided to live alone. His parents, who he couldn't visit due to the pandemic, felt that Paul was lonely despite being busy and surrounded by people. They weren't aware of any romantic relationships in his life. By the summer of 2021, as Paul resumed his regular activities, people began to notice a change in his behavior and personality. He picked up where he left off in the sports world, regaining his status as a key player on the hockey team and continuing his active lifestyle, even featuring in promotional advertisements. At the same time, those who knew him observed emerging characteristics that were not present before. Uncontrollable outbursts of anger became a concern. Furthermore, rumors circulated within the school community about his unusual interest in his female students. He would often engage in flirtatious behavior with teenage girls, staring at them for extended periods, leaving them visibly uncomfortable and embarrassed. Paul's importance in the hockey team's progress to the Australian Hockey League finals was evident despite the turmoil in his personal life. His recent breakup with Lily was likely a significant blow to his ego. Unexpected, on October 26, 2023, at approximately 4:30 a.m., the principal of St. Andrew's Cathedral School in central Sydney sent an email to students and parents announcing the school's closure until the end of the week due to a critical incident. A tragedy occurred at the school, prompting a thorough investigation. On Thursday and Friday, a 24-hour consultation center was established in the school library to support those affected. Forensic teams meticulously searched the school building and surrounding area, gathering evidence. The gym was closed off, and the adjacent shower area was scheduled for demolition due to the disturbing discovery made there. The incident began to unfold when the body of a 20-year-old woman was found in the shower around midnight. She had been seen alive just hours earlier. The water polo coach had entered the shower but never emerged. Surveillance footage revealed that someone had followed her around 8 p.m., but the pursuer left the area alone, heading towards the school exit. A family member was later asked to identify the body due to severe facial damage. The victim was identified as Lily James. As the police delved deeper into the case, surveillance footage played a crucial role, and the prime suspect, a young man, was caught on camera multiple times. Investigations were launched into Paul and Lily's cell phone records, helping police track the suspect's last known location using GPS. They also sought to recover the victim's phone, hoping to uncover evidence through text messages that could shed light on the events leading up to the crime. After successfully locating the devices, the police reconstructed the sequence of events, revealing that Paul had purchased a hammer from a hardware store just days before the crime. It seemed he was consumed by anger toward the victim and had planned a confrontation. On the morning of October 25, Lily followed her routine, attending the university and then heading to her job in the afternoon. Unbeknownst to her, her ex-boyfriend had other plans. Paul rented a silver Lexus and drove to the school, avoiding the building since he had no classes scheduled. He waited in the car, patiently biding his time. Once the students cleared out, he walked into the gym, concealing a hammer under his jacket to avoid drawing attention. From this vantage point, Paul observed Lily's movements, lying in wait for the perfect moment to strike. When Lily finished her training session and decided to take a shower, Paul saw his chance and followed her. An argument erupted, and in the heat of the moment, Paul attacked Lily, striking her head with the hammer. According to the pathologists, the impact was fatal, and Lily died instantly, without suffering. After waiting for an hour, Paul collected Lily's belongings and left the building. He then drove to Diamond Bay, where he disposed of the weapon in a trash can. Security cameras captured footage of him at the reserve at 8:47 p.m. His last known location, as tracked by investigators, was the Gap, a cliff in the eastern Sydney suburb of Vaucluse. As the community was still reeling from the initial tragedy, another shocking event occurred. On October 27, at 8 a.m., shopkeepers at Diamond Bay Reserve in Sydney's eastern suburbs made a disturbing discovery. A man's body was found just 11 miles away from the site of the first crime. A rescue team, including a bomb squad and Marine Corps personnel, was formed to retrieve the body. The body was recovered at 3:30 p.m. and taken for identification. Due to severe injuries, fingerprints were used to identify the individual. The victim was 24-year-old Paul, the same person who had been at the scene of the first crime. The investigation team faced a significant challenge in establishing a connection between the fatal incidents and uncovering the circumstances surrounding the events. The Gap is a notorious location with a history of suicides. Around 10 p.m., Paul used Lily's phone to send a message to her father, possibly revealing the location of her body. An hour later, the young man made a brief emergency call, but hung up quickly. When police arrived at the cliff, they found the personal belongings of Lily and Paul, but there was no sign of him. A rented car was parked nearby, suggesting that he may have taken his own life due to feelings of guilt or fear of facing the consequences of his actions. On October 26, police launched a search operation for his body, using helicopters and boats to scour the coastline. The first day's efforts were unsuccessful, but the next day, a body was found on rocks in a nearby nature reserve. With Paul deceased, the case was closed, and his parents collected his body, opting to cremate it in Sydney. A meeting was subsequently arranged with Tim Watson Monroe, a renowned forensic psychologist with extensive experience in analyzing the behavior of both criminals and victims. Mr. Watson Monroe was asked to share his insights on the incident and analyze the behavior of the perpetrator, Paul. According to Mr. Watson Monroe, Paul's actions were characteristic of individuals with an inflated sense of self-importance who struggle to accept rejection. He believed that Paul committed the crime in a premeditated and calculating manner, showing no remorse for his actions. When asked about Paul's decision to end his own life, Mr. Watson Monroe provided an explanation. Mr. Watson portrays Paul as a self-centered individual with psychopathic traits. Some have compared the tragic events to the finale of Romeo and Juliet, but the story of Lily and Paul is unique and unfolds in a distinct way. A genuine love relationship cannot thrive with pride, dishonesty, and betrayal. Unfortunately, Paul failed to grasp this, leading him to overlook the value of the person beside him. His decision to prioritize his own wounded ego ultimately resulted in the loss of a bright and vibrant life. This not only caused lasting pain for Lily's family but also for Paul's own loved ones. Regrettably, his actions left a devastating impact on those around him. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Agnes Klavina. Agnes Klavina was born on July 8, 1984, in Riga, the capital of Latvia. She grew up in a typical family with her parents and older sister, Greta. They sisters were extremely close, with only a couple of years between them. Their parents worked hard to provide them with a good education and support their dreams. Agnes was a lively and outgoing young girl who excelled in school, enjoyed sports, and had many friends. Her dream was to pursue a career in tourism or entertainment, as she loved to travel and was skilled at organizing fun leisure activities. Her bright personality and attractive appearance also drew attention from men, who frequently complimented her. From a young age, Agnes had many admirers vying for her attention. After completing her education, Agnes worked in the service industry while taking language courses and studying to become a tourism manager. At 20, she decided to leave her hometown in Latvia and move to London, seeking greater opportunities to develop her skills and talents. Her parents and older sister supported her decision, and soon after her move, Agnes met Michael Mills, a successful businessman 8 years her senior. He was well-educated, owned a thriving business, and had recently opened a movie theater and entertainment complex. Agnes and Michael quickly connected and started dating. He showered her with attention, gifts, and luxury travel. They made ambitious plans for their future together, and their love seemed destined to last. Agnes's friends and family remember this as her first true love. She radiated happiness beside Michael and envisioned a future as his wife. In 2014, Agnes received a 3-month contract as an administrator at a popular nightclub in Marbella, Spain. This opportunity required her to temporarily relocate, but she was eager to take on the challenge. Michael, unable to leave his life behind, supported her decision to sign the contract. For Agnes, this was a chance to gain valuable experience and potentially launch a new career path. Marbella, a renowned resort on the Mediterranean coast, attracts vacationers from around the world, particularly the wealthy. It's not uncommon to spot celebrities, athletes, and business leaders in the area. Kavina, being a sociable person, enjoyed working in such a vibrant environment. Before relocating, she visited her family in Latvia and shared the news of her 3-month employment contract. She also announced her plans to marry Michael upon her return to England. Her family was thrilled for Agnes and wished her well. In May 2014, Agnes packed lightly and moved to Spain for the season, while Michael remained in London. They stayed in touch through daily phone calls and video chats, sharing updates about their lives. Agnes was active on social media, posting daily updates, photos, and videos, which drew a large following interested in her life and work. Agnes had a vibrant and busy life, making the most of every day. After her employment contract ended, she decided to stay in Spain for a couple of months. The resort was entering its peak season, and she saw an opportunity to earn a good income. She discussed her plan with her Michael, who was supportive and promised to visit her for a few days since they hadn't seen each other in a long time. Agnes quickly landed a job as a hostess at an upscale restaurant and renewed her lease. As planned, her boyfriend, Michael, visited her in September. During his visit, they had a great time, planned their upcoming wedding, and picked a destination for their honeymoon. Michael had to return to London after less than a week, leaving Agnes to work in Spain for another month. After that, she planned to visit her relatives in Latvia before flying to England to join her Michael. Unfortunately, these plans never came to fruition. Agnes went to the popular Costa del Sol nightclub with friends on September 6th. Earlier in the day, she had informed Michael of her plans and he approved. Agnes and her friends had a great time at the club, and Agnes even posted some photos on her online profile. She wore a striking mini dress and carried a small white clutch that night. As the night wore on and her friends prepared to leave, Agnes decided to stay a bit longer and then take a taxi home. Her friends didn't worry about her, as she was responsible and hadn't had much to drink. When they said their goodbyes and headed out, Agnes was chatting with a man who had bought her a drink and was trying to get her attention. After that night, Agnes disappeared without a trace. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. No one could recall what time she left the club, who she left with, or where she went afterwards. Agnes failed to show up at work the next day, and attempts to contact her were unsuccessful as her phone was turned off. Her colleagues and friends immediately raised concerns, but the police were slow to respond to the missing persons report. As the day drew to a close, a worried Michael called Agnes's mother to report that he had been unable to reach his fiancée all day, which was unusual. The following day, Agnes's parents and Michael jointly tried to contact the Spanish police to report her disappearance, but they were informed that a missing persons report could only be filed in person by a relative. Undeterred, Michael and Agnes's family booked the next available flight to Marbella. It wasn't until 5 days after Agnes's disappearance that her family was able to file a missing persons report. The investigation began with a search of Agnes's rented apartment, which appeared to be untouched, as if she had simply stepped out for a short time. Her documents, money, and expensive jewelry were still in place, the refrigerator was stocked with prepared meals, and several outfits were laid out on the bed, suggesting that Agnes had been preparing to go out, likely to the club on the night she vanished. To aid in the search, Agnes's friends and family distributed flyers with her picture throughout the city, and the media picked up the story, featuring it on TV news programs and the front pages of local newspapers. The police reviewed footage from CCTV cameras inside and outside the entertainment venue, but encountered a setback. The files had already been deleted. However, with the help of specialists, they were able to recover the recordings. One of the restored videos, taken by a camera near the parking lot exit, showed Agnes leaving the club around 6 a.m. with a man. It was clear that she did not leave voluntarily. The final footage, which showed Agnes alive, was thoroughly examined by experts. However, the more they studied the footage, the more alarming it became. Agnes was seen being led by a man to the parking lot, clearly under duress. He had a tight grip on her waist, and Agnes looked frightened. She attempted to break free multiple times and appeared to be saying something emotional, but he persisted in leading her to a Mercedes A63 with tinted windows. As he forced Agnes into the car, it became clear that another person was already inside. Meanwhile, the first man got into the driver's seat. Agnes temporarily managed to open the car door and tried to escape, but he who had been standing next to her, likely the doorman, intervened and pushed her back into the car at the driver's signal. In return for his assistance, the driver appeared to hand the doorman something, presumably a cash reward. Agnes's phone was turned off 6 minutes after she got into the car, and it was never turned back on. The vehicle's subsequent movements couldn't be tracked because there were no CCTV cameras along the route. It became clear that the men in the cabin were the last people to see Agnes before she went missing. Despite this, the case was shrouded in secrecy from the start. Everyone involved in the investigation signed confidentiality agreements, and information was kept from the press and even Agnes's loved ones. For the first few months, Agnes's parents and Michael were left in the dark, with only vague updates that the investigation was ongoing and that it was too early to draw conclusions. As time passed without any word from Agnes, hope began to dwindle. Agnes's fiancé, Michael, periodically gave interviews pleading for help in finding her, but no one ever came forward with information. It wasn't until 6 months later that Agnes's relatives were finally shown footage from the club's cameras and given the names of the 3 men who had last been in contact with her. Wesley Capper, the son of a wealthy British millionaire, was identified as he who forcibly removed Agnes from a club and pushed her into a car. Wesley Capper was accompanied by his longtime friend, Craig Porter, who had no specific occupation and had previously been on the police's radar. A third man, Cyan Usman, a dark-skinned doorman, was also in the car. Under interrogation, all 3 men claimed they were innocent, stating that Agnes had voluntarily gotten into the car. According to Wesley Capper, he and a friend had met Agnes at a club and approached her to strike up a conversation. Wesley Capper claimed that Agnes was already intoxicated, but this contradicts the testimony of her friends. He also stated that Agnes had accepted a drink from him and his friend. Capper then invited Agnes to continue the party at his luxurious country home, which she allegedly agreed to. However, Wesley Capper claims that Agnes changed her mind once they were in the car and asked to be dropped off in the middle of the road, stating that she would take a cab home. Wesley Capper claimed that he dropped Agnes off at her requested location, which was an unlit stretch of road with no CCTV cameras. Craig Porter couldn't confirm or deny Wesley Capper's statement about Agnes's presence in their car. According to Porter's own admission, he was also extremely drunk and didn't know how or when Agnes got into the vehicle. He fell asleep shortly after leaving the parking lot and only woke up to find Agnes was no longer in the car. The doorman, Cyan Usman, confirmed that Agnes was intoxicated, but he couldn't say if she voluntarily got into the car. However, he did say that when the car moved, Agnes opened the door and nearly fell out. The driver then asked him to close the door, for which he received a large tip. When questioned, Cyan Usman said he didn't think Agnes's attempt to get out of the car was an escape attempt. In his opinion, she might have accidentally opened the door due to her intoxication. He also noted that Agnes didn't scream or ask for help during the incident. The security footage clearly shows Wesley Capper forcibly leading Agnes to the car, holding her by the waist and wrist. However, Wesley's defense is that Agnes was dizzy and he was only holding her to prevent her from falling. Later in the investigation, another unsettling video came to light, shot in the south of Spain, specifically at the Puerta de la Dua in the Su Grande Marina. The footage was of the luxury yacht belonging to John Capper, a millionaire and the father of one of the suspects. Dated September 10th, just 4 days after Agnes went missing, it showed Wesley Capper and two other men boarding the yacht. Notably, they carried a heavy suitcase and what appeared to be a rolled-up carpet. However, when questioned about this footage, Wesley Capper explained that he and his friends had traveled to the yacht simply to have a good time. He claimed the suitcase was packed with their belongings and what seemed to be a carpet was actually bedding. Wesley Capper failed to account for where everything had gone, considering none of these items were seen upon their return. The investigators meticulously searched the yacht and the automobile, only to find nothing of consequence because both vehicles had been thoroughly cleaned, thus destroying any possible DNA evidence. Interestingly, during this exhaustive search, a blonde hair was found in a car trunk, although determining its origin was not feasible as the hair itself had strangely disappeared over the course of the investigation, marking another puzzle within this intriguing case. A few hours after Agnes was last seen in the defendant's car, Wesley Capper made several calls to emergency services, but hung up each time without waiting for an answer. It seemed as though he was afraid or uncertain about what to do. Wesley Capper claimed he was drunk and made the calls randomly. The lawyer for the Agnes family argued that Agnes was likely already dead, and her body was probably at the bottom of the sea, hidden in the suitcase the suspects had brought on board the yacht. He also believed that the case had been intentionally delayed, giving the suspects ample time to destroy any evidence that could prove their guilt. It wasn't until a year and a half after Agnes's disappearance that Wesley Capper, Porter, and Usman were finally brought to trial. They were accused of holding Agnes against her will and forcing her into a car. Unfortunately, due to a lack of evidence, no further charges could be made. This decision outraged Agnes's relatives, but the judge stood firm. In 2019, nearly 5 years after Agnes's disappearance, the three men were brought to trial again. Despite the prolonged period, they continued to deny their guilt, claiming that Agnes voluntarily got into the car. The prosecutor argued that the doorman should be considered an accomplice for helping the defendants drive the victim away. The doorman, Usman, could have faced a 5-year prison sentence. Instead, he defended himself, stating that he was a suspect due to his skin color and lack of access to a good lawyer. He claimed that he sent all his earnings to a starving family in Africa. Wesley Capper and lawyers argued that their clients were only guilty of persuading Agnes to get into the car, not forcing her. They believed that Agnes was dropped off on the road as requested, but was possibly kidnapped and killed by someone else while waiting for a cab. The judge's verdict was met with surprise and anger from Agnes's relatives, as none of the defendants received any punishment. Usman was acquitted of all charges. Wesley Capper was given a 2-year sentence for taking advantage of Agnes's intoxication to coax her into his car, and Porter received a 6-month sentence for aiding Wesley Capper's actions. However, they received suspended sentences and did not serve any time in prison. Instead, they paid Agnes's family £101,000 in compensation. Agnes's family was unhappy with the outcome and decided to appeal. It later came to light that the defendants had both committed further offenses while awaiting the court's decision. Wesley Capper, who was intoxicated by alcohol and drugs at the time, hit and killed a woman with his vehicle and then fled the scene. Meanwhile, Porter and a friend, who were also intoxicated, stole a car after violently assaulting its owner. Wesley Capper received a surprisingly lenient sentence of probation for his serious crime, thanks to his lawyer's skilled defense. As part of his sentence, he paid a substantial amount of compensation to the family of she he had killed in a car accident. In contrast, Porter was not as fortunate and was sent to jail, although the exact length of his sentence is not publicly known. Nearly 7 years after Agnes's disappearance, the prime suspect in her case finally faced consequences. However, it wasn't the law that caught up with Wesley Capper, but his own destructive lifestyle. Years of substance abuse took a serious toll on his health. During the -19 pandemic, Capper was hospitalized, and after beginning to recover from the illness, he suffered a stroke. He passed away on July 26, 2021, at the age of 44. At that time, Agnieszka's parents appealed to the court again, but unfortunately, the suspect had since passed away and could no longer face prosecution. Despite this development, the case was still before the Supreme Court, although a new turn of events would arise 9 years later, long after Agnieszka's fate had been presumed, her body never found, alive or dead. Following this, her parents, sister, Michael, and their lawyer converged on a plausible theory. It suggested that the perpetrators had likely disposed of Agnieszka's body in a suitcase that was secretly boarded on a yacht, eventually dropped in a distant, undisclosed part of the open ocean. In mid-June, a gardener at the exclusive Lida Golf Club in the Costa del Sol region discovered a mysterious object near the coast while cleaning the area. Upon closer inspection, the object turned out to be an old, badly damaged suitcase. The gardener did not attempt to open it and instead called the police. When law enforcement officers opened the suitcase, they found human remains inside. Further examination revealed that the remains belonged to she, approximately 25 to 35 years old at the time of her death. It was also determined that the suitcase had been submerged in water for around 10 years before washing up on the shore. Based on these findings, the police hypothesized that the remains might belong to Agnieszka, a woman who had gone missing 9 years ago. To confirm this theory, investigators are conducting DNA tests to compare Agnieszka's DNA with the remains found in the suitcase. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Wang Nan. Wang Nan, born in 1987 in Nanjing, China, a major city and former capital, Wang Nan grew up in a relatively affluent family. Her parents provided her with the best possible education and encouraged her to develop her talents. After completing her secondary education, Wang Nan enrolled in a prestigious university, where she studied business and finance, and also learned several foreign languages. Upon graduation, she landed a job at a large travel agency, where she quickly proved herself to be a valuable, responsible, and motivated employee. Her career advanced rapidly, and she was soon sent to Thailand to head a new branch and oversee its development. Wang Nan worked as a top manager for several years before deciding to leave the agency to start her own business. She opened a Chinese restaurant in Bangkok, which she managed successfully, and it eventually grew into a small but popular chain. Wang Nan was a thriving young entrepreneur who had devoted her life to her career. With her constant business engagements, she barely had time for socializing or dating, and her loneliness became a normal part of her life. At almost 30 years old, Wang Nan was well established in Thailand, having lived there for a while and become proficient in the language. However, she strived for further improvement, taking additional courses to learn Thai at a training center. There, she met a young man named Yu Xiaodong, who initially stared at her before introducing himself in his native language. They exchanged brief conversations, and he inquired about her reason for studying the language. Wang Nan replied that it was for business purposes, and Yu Xiaodong proposed exchanging business cards to potentially meet up Sunday. Although Wang Nan was not interested in continuing the conversation, she still politely gave him her business card. Yu Xiaodong also gave Wang Nan his own business card, which said that he worked in the import-export industry in Bangkok. Not very impressed, Wang Nan put the business card in her wallet and forgot about it. Yu Xiaodong was the only one who showed genuine interest in Wang Nan, and he wasted no time in calling her the very next day. However, she was preoccupied with work and couldn't spare even a few minutes to talk, so she declined his invitation to meet for coffee. A few days later, Yu Xiaodong asked her out again, but Wang Nan turned him down once more, citing her busy schedule and preparations for an upcoming business conference where she hoped to expand her professional network. Undeterred, Yu Xiaodong showed up at the conference with a stunning bouquet of flowers and waited for Wang Nan to become available. When she was free, he approached her and asked her out once more. This time, Wang Nan was charmed by his persistence, which was a new experience for her. No one had ever pursued her so relentlessly before, so she agreed to meet him for dinner. As it turned out, Yu Xiaodong's interest in Wang Nan was more than just a passing infatuation. He was completely smitten. He showered her with attention, surprise gifts, and romantic gestures, including sending flowers to her doorstep every morning with sweet notes attached. He also called her at least twice a day to wish her good morning and good night. Wang Nan had mixed emotions about the situation. While she was irritated by Yu Xiaodong's all-consuming infatuation, she was also flattered that someone was making such an effort to win her heart. As a result, she found herself unexpectedly entering into a romantic relationship. Yu Xiaodong went out of his way to woo her, not only romantically but also by trying to be perfect in every aspect of their relationship. He shared her interests and opinions, learned to cook her favorite meals, and planned exciting activities for them to enjoy together. He was also eager to help her with her work and household chores at a moment's notice. Wang Nan was over the moon with happiness, feeling as though she was living in a fairy tale. Yu Xiaodong's behavior, however, was moving at a breakneck pace. Despite having only been together for a few months, he was already making plans for their wedding and discussing potential names for their future children. This made Wang Nan uncomfortable, but Yu Xiaodong would counter by pointing out that they were both in their 30s and that it was time for them to start thinking about building a family. That night, Yu Xiaodong wrote a heartfelt letter to Wang Nan, expressing his deep affection and commitment to being a good husband and father. The next morning, he arrived at her doorstep with a bouquet of flowers, reiterating his seriousness about marrying her. Wang Nan jokingly mentioned that the courthouse wouldn't open for another hour and a half, but Yu Xiaodong suggested they go there immediately. To her surprise, the courthouse was open, and the officer responsible for registering marriages was already at his desk, ready to formalize their union. Yu Xiaodong had secretly arranged for a hasty marriage ceremony to take place early in the morning. The whole event was unusual and lacking in formality. There were no guests, no exchange of rings, no wedding dress or veil, and no commemorative photographs. Wang Nan couldn't shake the feeling that the whole thing wasn't really happening, especially since she hadn't even introduced her new husband to her mother, with whom she was extremely close. Before she knew it, she was holding a marriage certificate in her hand, and her newlywed husband was standing beside her, beaming with satisfaction. Wang Nan's marriage was troubled from the start. She had second thoughts about marrying Yu Xiaodong almost immediately after the wedding. Initially, she had hoped he would be a reliable partner, a man she could depend on. Unfortunately, her expectations were not met, and her new husband's true nature soon revealed itself. Yu Xiaodong spent most of his time at home playing video games, using his wife's money without contributing to their household expenses. Whenever his wife asked him why he wasn't working, he claimed his business was slow due to seasonal fluctuations and that he was just taking a break. However, her suspicions grew as time passed, and she decided to investigate his business. Her findings shocked her. His supposedly successful import-export company existed only on paper and business cards. Wang Nan was horrified, realizing too late that she should have had a prenuptial agreement. Now, her husband could freely spend her earnings, and if they divorced, he would claim her assets. During a tense conversation, Yu Xiaodong broke down in tears, promising to turn his life around and find a good job. However, it soon became apparent that he had no intention of looking for work and was content to rely on his wife's support. Yu Xiaodong, a grown man, consistently acted like a child. He spent most of his time playing computer games and expected his wife, Wang Nan, to pay for his personal expenses whenever he helped out around the house or assisted her at the restaurant. Wang Nan eventually had enough and told him she would no longer give him money unless he got a job. The next day, Yu Xiaodong disappeared, taking their marriage certificate and Wang Nan's identity card with him. Wang Nan only discovered the missing documents that evening when her accountant called to inquire about a large transfer of funds from her account. She was shocked, as she had not authorized the transfer. However, she immediately suspected her husband's involvement. It turned out that Yu Xiaodong had transferred more than $500,000 into his own account, using the stolen documents to deceive the bank into thinking it was their joint decision to transfer their shared money. Wang Nan quickly reported the theft to the police, who tracked down Yu Xiaodong a few hours later as he attempted to withdraw some of the stolen money. Confronted by the police and his wife, Xiaodong broke down and begged for forgiveness on his knees. He confessed to losing a large sum of money through gambling, which had led to threats of death and demands to repay the debt. This was not his first brush with the law, as he had previously served an 8-year prison sentence for robbery in his home country of China. Wang Nan was consumed by shame as she learned the truth about her husband's past. Despite this, she believed that his addiction to gambling was a disease that could be overcome, and she wanted to help him recover and return to a normal life. To support him, Wang Nan agreed to pay off half of his debt and offered him a job as heater of one of her restaurants. Initially, Yu Xiaodong appeared to be grateful for the opportunity and took his new role seriously. He even developed a promising strategy for the restaurant's growth. However, his enthusiasm was short-lived. Before long, he began to spend more time playing computer games and indulging in other leisure activities. Meanwhile, Wang Nan discovered she was pregnant and shared the news with her husband. Yu Xiaodong initially expressed reservations about the pregnancy, and in a moment of hesitation, asked his wife to consider an abortion, which she flatly refused. The disagreement escalated to the point where he threatened divorce and division of their property, but eventually, his demeanor softened, and he apologized for his rash words. Yu Xiaodong later admitted that his outburst was driven by emotional anxiety, but ultimately, he was happy about the impending arrival of their child. However, things took a dramatic turn 2 months later. During a fateful trip, Yu Xiaodong suggested that his wife purchase life insurance, citing the pregnancy as a reason to safeguard her well-being and that of their unborn child in the event of any unforeseen circumstances. This seemingly caring gesture came after a period of harmony in their marriage, where he had been attentive, supportive, and diligent in his role as a husband and expectant father. Wang Nan quickly agreed to her husband's suggestion and even wondered why she hadn't thought of it herself. They purchased insurance the very next day. A couple of weeks later, Yu Xiaodong proposed a vacation to help them relax and unwind. Wang Nan was initially hesitant, but her husband was insistent. He pointed out that they had never had a honeymoon and that traveling with a baby would be difficult in the coming years. He also felt that they needed a break to clear their minds of the stress and negativity they had been experiencing. Wang Nan was eventually won over by her husband's arguments and agreed to the trip. He took charge of planning the entire vacation, choosing the destination, booking the hotel, and organizing activities that would be enjoyable and educational, yet not too strenuous for Wang Nan's pregnant state. Wang Nan was happy to leave the planning to her husband and was pleased to see how much effort he was putting into making their vacation special. On June 7th, they visited the park for the first time and spent most of the day exploring its many beautiful sights and lookouts. However, as the summer evening wore on, the park became increasingly crowded, with tourists everywhere. As the sun began to set, Wang Nan noticed that her husband, Yu Xiaodong, was growing angry and nervous. When she asked him what was wrong, he explained that the crowds were ruining their chance to enjoy a romantic sunset in peace. Despite his initial frustration, Yu Xiaodong tried to make the most of the situation, suggesting that they could still have a romantic moment as the sun set. As the park began to clear out, he climbed the fence of the observation deck and called out to his wife, Wang Nan, to join him, promising her an incredible view. However, Wang declined, citing the darkness and potential danger. Yu Xiaodong became angry but eventually returned to his wife, suggesting that they should come back to the park another time to watch the sunrise together. The Wang Nan and Yu Xiaodong returned to their hotel late on Saturday night, so they decided to sleep in and head back to the reserve early on Sunday morning. As planned, they woke up at 3 a.m. on June 9th and left for the national park while it was still dark outside. Their goal was to catch the first rays of the rising sun. When they arrived, they found the park nearly empty, with hardly any other visitors. They watched the sunrise together on an observation deck. Then, Yu Xiaodong encouraged his wife, Wang Nan, to join him at the cliff's edge to see some ancient rock paintings. Initially hesitant, Wang Nan trusted her husband's assurance that he would help her climb down and back up safely. As they took in the breathtaking view, Yu Xiaodong suddenly asked Wang Nan if she regretted anything in life. She replied that she did not. However, in a shocking turn of events, Yu Xiaodong's demeanor changed. He touched his wife's hair, kissed her cheek, whispered "die" in her ear, and then pushed her off the cliff. To avoid detection, he checked their surroundings to make sure no one had witnessed the incident. Looking down, he couldn't see where Wang Nan had fallen, and the silence indicated that there were no witnesses below. Yu Xiaodong calmly walked towards the park exit, planning to report the incident after his wife was surely dead. However, hikers who had wandered off the trail spotted Wang Nan's body on the rocks and immediately called for rescue, reporting the incident. As Yu Xiaodong was leaving the reserve, several emergency vehicles sped past him, sirens blaring. Realizing what was happening, he quickly returned to the scene, pretending to be distressed. There, he put on a convincing performance, crying and begging for help. Convinced that his wife was dead and no one would discover the truth, he remained unaware that Wang Nan's fall had been broken by tree branches, which reduced her speed before she landed on bushes and then rolled onto the rocks. This series of events cushioned the impact, saving her life and that of their child, although she suffered severe injuries. Yu Xiaodong was overcome with grief, crying and lamenting the loss of his wife and child. However, his wife suddenly regained consciousness and attempted to speak, but was unable to. The people around her noticed the genuine horror on Yu Xiaodong's face, but he quickly composed himself and leaned in close to his wife. In a hushed tone, he warned her in Chinese to remain silent if she wanted to survive. Wang Nan's injuries were severe, including head trauma, multiple fractures, lacerations, soft tissue contusions, ruptured internal organs, and massive blood loss. Her spine was also severely damaged, leaving doctors concerned that even if she survived, she would likely be paralyzed and never walk again. Wang Nan spent several days in a coma, connected to life support machines, during which time her husband remained by her side constantly. However, despite his devoted appearance, Yu Xiaodong's intentions were sinister. Every time he was alone with his wife, he thought about how to complete the job without arousing suspicion. His actions were a ruse, hiding his true intentions behind a mask of love and devotion that he examined the devices, but couldn't find a way to quietly disable them. Wang Nan slowly regained consciousness. When she did, her husband was beside himself with fear. He stayed with her constantly, terrified that she would reveal the truth to the police at any moment. When they were alone, he threatened her again, saying he had nothing to lose. During the initial police interrogation, the Wang Nan supported her husband's claim that her fall was caused by dizziness. However, when her husband briefly left the room, Wang Nan asked the nurse to call the police again and prevent her husband from re-entering. It was then that she recounted the disturbing story of her fall, alleging that her husband had attempted to kill her. Yu Xiaodong suddenly burst into the room, shouting that his wife was delusional due to her head injury and that he would never harm her or their baby. His explanation was not believable, and he was arrested on the same day. At the hospital, he was charged with multiple crimes, including attempted murder and intimidation after her husband was taken into custody and sent to jail to await trial. Wang Nan finally felt a sense of relief. Although she still had a long and difficult recovery ahead of her, she now felt safe. Wang Nan initially held on to hope that her pregnancy could be saved, despite the severe fall. However, her medical team advised her to terminate the pregnancy due to the large amounts of painkillers and antibiotics she was receiving, as well as the multiple surgeries she underwent under general anesthesia. The doctors prioritized Wang Nan's life, warning her that the fetus was unlikely to survive the strong medications. This news came as a devastating shock to Wang Nan, but she ultimately followed the doctor's advice. During the trial, Yu Xiaodong vehemently denied any wrongdoing, sticking to his claim that the incident was an accident. He remained calm and composed in prison, hiring skilled lawyers and expressing confidence that he would either be acquitted or receive a lenient sentence. In contrast, the investigators and prosecutor were convinced that Yu Xiaodong had deliberately committed the crime. Motivated by the prospect of collecting a substantial insurance payout and inheriting his wife's fortune, which was valued at nearly $2.5 million at the time. During an interrogation, Yu Xiaodong made a shocking revelation about his motive for the heinous crime. He disclosed that he was angry with his wife for not paying off his entire debt, which had accumulated due to his gambling habit. In his mind, if his wife truly loved him, she would have cleared all his debts since she had the financial means to do so. This perceived betrayal led Yu Xiaodong to believe that his wife did not love him, and therefore, he felt justified in punishing her. After making this astonishing confession, the defendant became silent, seemingly aware that he had revealed too much. He attempted to retract his statement, claiming that he had been misunderstood. Nevertheless, his unexpected admission, combined with Wang Nan's testimony, was sufficient to secure a lengthy prison sentence. In March 2021, Yu Xiaodong was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment. However, he and his lawyers filed multiple appeals, and 6 months later, the Thai court showed unusual leniency by reducing the life sentence to 10 years in prison. Wang Nan and her family were shocked and outraged by the lenient sentence given to Yu Xiaodong, believing it would set a bad precedent and encourage others to commit similar heinous crimes. Yu Xiaodong received a sentence of 10 years for attempting to murder his pregnant Wang Nan. As of now, Yu Xiaodong is serving her 10-year sentence while Wang Nan is challenging the court's decision. Meanwhile, Yu Xiaodong is filing appeals to prove her innocence. Wang Nan has successfully restarted her business in 2023 and also established an organization that provides support to women who have been affected by domestic violence. She writes about her personal experiences and warnings for women on her blog. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Kirsten Hatfield. Kirsten Hatfield was born on February 12, 1989, in Midwest City, Oklahoma. Kirsten's father left the family soon after her birth, and her mother, Shannon, moved back in with grandparents. When Kirsten was 2 years old, they moved to their own home. Later, Shannon remarried, but the marriage was short-lived, leaving Shannon to care for her 2 young daughters alone. Kirsten, being the older sibling, took on a lot of responsibility, helping her mother care for her younger sister, Faith. Kirsten and Faith shared a bedroom, while their mother slept in the adjacent room. On May 13, 1997, Shannon put her daughters to bed as usual. Kirsten was 8 years old, and Faith was 3. However, Faith had already fallen asleep, so Shannon only said goodnight to Kirsten and left the door to their room slightly open, as she always did, in case Kirsten or Faith needed her. At around 3 a.m., Shannon was awoken by a noise coming from the girls' room. Thinking one of her daughters was awake, Shannon got out of bed to check on them. As she approached the door, the noise stopped. Assuming her daughters had gone back to sleep, Shannon was about to return to her room when she noticed that the door to their room was now completely closed. This was unusual, as she was certain she had left it slightly open. She wondered if one of them had closed the door or if she had simply forgotten to leave it open. Shannon opened the door slightly to check, but she didn't enter the room before returning to bed. Shannon went to wake up her daughters at 6:30 a.m. the next morning, but only found Faith in their bedroom. Shannon asked Faith where Kirsten was, and when Faith said she didn't know, Shannon began a thorough search of the house. However, Kirsten was nowhere to be found. Shannon then checked outside the house and contacted the parents of Kirsten's friends to see if she had come to their house. But no one had seen her. Shannon's search efforts led her to call her father, who lived nearby, to see if Kirsten had gone to his house or not. Unfortunately, he hadn't seen her either. At this point, Shannon realized Kirsten was missing, and her father advised her to call the police. When the police arrived, they initially thought Kirsten might be hiding in the house or had simply wandered off for a walk, given the town's low crime rate. However, upon inspecting Kirsten's room, they found the window slightly open with a few drops of blood on the frame. This raised their suspicions that something more serious had occurred. Further investigation led them to discover a piece of children's underwear stained with blood on the ground outside the window. After confirming with Shannon that the underwear belonged to Kirsten, the police realized they were likely dealing with a kidnapping. More officers were called to the scene to assist with the investigation, which marked the beginning of a more extensive search for Kirsten. The police investigation into Kirsten's disappearance began with a search of the area around the house. During this search, the police spoke with Kirsten's mother, who reported hearing a noise at 3 a.m. and now realized that it may have been the sound of her daughter being taken. Despite the search, nothing suspicious was found, and the police began canvassing the neighborhood, speaking with all the residents. Unfortunately, none of the neighbors reported seeing or hearing anything unusual on the night of the abduction. However, one neighbor did mention being woken up by a barking dog around 3 a.m., which coincided with the time of the abduction. With no solid leads, investigators turned to a child psychologist to interview Faith, who was only 3 years old. Despite her young age, Faith was able to share what she had witnessed, but her statement was limited to a single phrase: "A bad person came and took my sister." This confirmed that Kirsten had not left the house voluntarily, but unfortunately, it did not provide any further information about the perpetrator or Kirsten's whereabouts. Detectives had to restart the investigation practically from scratch. Their initial suspicion leaned towards someone who knew Kirsten well, as it seemed unlikely that a stranger could abduct her from her own room without a sound. Working on this theory, police discovered that Kirsten's mother, Shannon, had a history of drug-related problems. The detectives considered the possibility that the abduction might be related to this. Perhaps the mother owed money to some people in the criminal underworld, and they decided to take her daughter as payment. The police did not rule out the mother willingly handing over her daughter. This would explain why the abduction happened almost silently. The investigation into Kirsten's disappearance continued, with detectives initially speaking to Shannon, her mother. Shannon denied any involvement, claiming to have been clean from substance abuse for some time and insisting she would never harm her daughter. Although detectives were not convinced of Shannon's innocence, they could not find any evidence to prove her involvement. The police then turned to the public for help, using the media to ask for any information that might be relevant to the case. In response, they received hundreds of calls, but most of the calls were fruitless. However, one clue provided a promising lead. A woman reported her boyfriend's suspicious behavior, including aggressive outbursts and a disturbing threat he made during an argument. The police investigated the man and discovered that he knew Shannon's brother, which meant Kirsten might have known him too. Additionally, the man had a history of drug use and assault, and he had previously been familiar with the Hatfield family home. Despite this, the investigation ultimately found that the man had a solid alibi for the time Kirsten went missing. Multiple witnesses confirmed that he was at a bar until around 4 a.m. on the night of the disappearance, making it impossible for him to have abducted Kirsten. Detectives pursued multiple leads, but each one led to a dead end. As time passed, the hope of finding Kirsten alive began to fade. Kirsten's mother, Shannon, refused to give up. She took matters into her own hands, determined to find her daughter. She gave interviews to local media outlets, distributed flyers, and even investigated potential suspects on her own. However, Shannon faced numerous obstacles. Many local businesses refused to display Kirsten's flyers, citing company policies. She also attempted to meet with the state governor, but was unsuccessful. Shannon established a volunteer center to help find Kirsten. The center focused on distributing flyers and engaging with the media. However, Shannon encountered new challenges. Some volunteers stole money, lied about their work, and used the media to gain attention for themselves. Despite these setbacks, Shannon persevered in her search for the truth. After years of effort, Shannon realized that her approach was not yielding results. She enrolled in college, earned a degree in criminology, and became a parole officer. Shannon's goal was not only to find her daughter's kidnapper but also to protect others from potentially dangerous criminals who might be released from prison. Shannon suspected Kirsten's kidnapper had a history of violent crimes. To pursue this lead, she researched people with violent pasts in her area but found no connection to Kirsten's disappearance. Despite her efforts, she eventually had to accept that Kirsten might have passed away and might not return. Still, Shannon continued to search for answers. Periodically, police reopened the case to investigate new leads, working with the FBI to create an updated sketch of Kirsten's possible appearance. In 2014, there was a breakthrough in the Kirsten case. A woman contacted the police and shared a shocking discovery she had made while sorting through her late mother's belongings. Among her mother's possessions was a diary detailing the woman's father's confession, claiming he had killed Kirsten Hatfield. The diary was extremely detailed, and detectives were convinced of its accuracy. According to the diary, the man had kidnapped Kirsten from her bedroom, took her to a house he owned in a nearby town, and murdered her after horribly torturing her. The description of the crime process spanned many pages, leaving even veteran investigators confused. The diary also revealed that the crime had been recorded on a videotape. Investigators immediately questioned the woman's father. However, his reaction was surprising. While he denied any involvement in the Kirsten case, he asserted that he had known who was responsible for Kirsten's death, saying the murder had occurred at his ex-girlfriend's house. The police were confused and asked for the house address. They quickly received a warrant and sent a team to thoroughly search this house. The forensic investigation began with a crucial step: the use of luminol, a substance that glows when exposed to very small amounts of blood. When the forensic team applied luminol to the scene, they were surprised by the results. An expert later described the house as lit up like a Christmas tree due to the numerous bloodstains. The bloodstains matched the details of the murder described in the diary, leading the team to believe they had finally found concrete evidence. To investigate further, police removed the floorboards, cut out sections of wallpaper, and sent these items to a laboratory for analysis. They also organized an excavation team in the hope of finding the victim's body. In addition, the police also discovered a box containing hundreds of videotapes in the house, so they had to review the diary. They suspected that one of the tapes might have contained footage of the victim being abused. Detectives meticulously reviewed each tape, but after hours of analysis, none of the tapes were related to the murder. Excavations also proved fruitless, with no remains or evidence found in the soil. However, just when the investigation seemed to have been gaining momentum, the police encountered an unexpected and shocking episode. Experts who analyzed the bloodstains in the house concluded that the bloodstains had actually belonged to an animal, not a human. This revelation left the police stunned and wondering what had just happened. Had someone deliberately deceived them with a cruel joke? Or was the person writing the diary struggling with mental health issues and convinced by a false narrative that had developed in their mind? The truth was still unknown. Detectives had run out of leads in Kirsten's case, and the case was once again stalled. In an effort to revive the investigation, the case was reassigned to a new detective named Daryl Miller in the summer of 2015. Miller decided to start from scratch and review all existing documents and records. During his scrutiny, Miller discovered something surprising. His predecessors had overlooked some key evidence, including blood found on Kirsten's windowsill and on her underwear. The evidence had been stored in a warehouse, but shockingly had never been sent to a laboratory for analysis. Miller suspected that the reason for this might have been because police initially thought the blood belonged to Kirsten, which would not have yielded any useful results. However, Miller decided to send them to the laboratory for analysis. The results were surprising. The blood sample did not belong to Kirsten, but to an unidentified man. This was a significant breakthrough after many years of investigation. Miller decided to collect DNA samples from all the men who had participated in the investigation since the kidnapping. Police tracked down each person on the list and sent their DNA to a lab for analysis. Everyone was cooperative and provided their DNA samples quickly. Miller patiently waited for the results, and finally he received a call from the lab. Experts had analyzed one of the samples and found a perfect match with bloodstains found on the window and the victim's underwear. The DNA belonged to Anthony Palma, 56. The Hatfield family's neighbor who lived across the street. Anthony had been one of the first people the police spoke to on the day of the abduction. At the time, he claimed to have woken up around 3 a.m. due to his dog barking. Now that his DNA had been linked to the crime scene, detectives decided to bring him in for further questioning. Although the DNA evidence was sufficient for a conviction, the investigators hoped to obtain a confession from Anthony. A confession would expedite the trial and potentially lead them to Kirsten's body, which was still missing. To get Anthony to talk, the detectives invited him for questioning, telling him it was a routine process. They claimed they were re-interviewing everyone, including neighbors, to gather new information. In reality, their goal was to get Anthony to admit whether he had ever been inside the Hatfield family home. Detectives asked Anthony to recall any additional details about the night in question. He retold the same story he had shared 18 years earlier. But this time he added a new detail. He claimed to have seen a white car parked outside Kirsten's house, although he didn't think much of it at the time. The police then asked Anthony about his relationship with Kirsten and her family. He stated that he knew them as neighbors, but he had never interacted with Kirsten personally. He maintained that he got along well with the other neighborhood children, who would often ask him for help fixing their bikes or visit him for candy. This conversation became a critical point in the investigation, as the police had discovered Anthony's blood on the windowsill of Kirsten's bedroom. When they asked if he had ever entered the house, Anthony claimed he had not. This statement raised suspicions, as the presence of his blood suggested otherwise. The detectives faced a challenge. Anthony's blood was fresh, suggesting it had been left recently, but he had had a visitor to the house when it belonged to a friend. The investigators decided to move forward with the interrogation. Informing Anthony that his blood had been found in Kirsten's room and on her underwear. Anthony repeatedly denied ever entering the house, despite the evidence to the contrary. The investigators attempted to extract a confession, but he consistently maintained his innocence. The detectives changed their approach and exited the room, leaving Detective Miller to speak with Anthony privately. Miller entered with a photo of Kirsten, placing it in front of Anthony. However, Anthony promptly pushed the photo away, refusing to look at it for the remainder of the conversation. Miller asked various questions, attempting to prompt Anthony into a confession, but he continued to deny any involvement. Failing to obtain an admission of guilt, the police ended the interrogation and apprehended Anthony. A subsequent search of his residence, made possible by a search warrant, uncovered no evidence of Kirsten's remains or any other relevant evidence. During the trial, Anthony repeatedly denied any involvement in the crime. But DNA evidence told a different story. As the trial progressed, new details emerged that the police had initially overlooked. It was revealed that Anthony had a history of run-ins with the law, including a prior conviction for breaking into a girl's bedroom and assaulting her. He had also been imprisoned in the 1980s for a violent attack involving a weapon. Anthony's past convictions signaled his dangerousness, yet were overlooked in 1997. In 2017, a jury returned a guilty verdict for Kirsten's kidnapping and Kirsten's murder, and Anthony was sentenced to life in prison. Despite the guilty verdict, Anthony never disclosed the location of Kirsten's body. Kirsten's mother refused to give up hope, however. She consistently reached out to Anthony, calling and visiting him in prison, in an effort to find out where Kirsten's body was. She spent hours trying to extract the truth from him, but ultimately, she was unsuccessful. Tragically, in 2019, Anthony was killed by his cellmate, who was motivated by a desire for revenge for Anthony's horrific crime against a child. As a result, Kirsten's family's only hope of finding Kirsten's body now depends on hikers or tourists who might stumble upon it in remote national parks, where Anthony may have buried their investigators. It's time to uncover the truth behind another case. The case of Callie Ann Poulton. Callie Ann Poulton was born on September 20, 1989, in Rochester, New York. As an only child, she received all the love and attention from her parents. However, when Callie turned 3, her parents decided to divorce, and she stayed with her mother, Judy. Despite the divorce, Callie's father maintained a good relationship with Judy and regularly visited his daughter. After the divorce, Judy moved to a quiet suburban apartment complex in Rochester. Although Callie's father helped with childcare, Judy faced financial difficulties. To make ends meet, she took on a part-time job delivering magazines to her neighbors. Her goal was to save enough money to take Callie on a trip to Disney World the following summer. On the evening of May 23, 1994, Judy was preparing for her delivery shift. She was at home, inserting leaflets into the magazines, when Callie asked to go for a walk. It was an evening, and Callie wanted to ride her tricycle. Judy checked outside and saw other children playing in the yard, so she allowed Callie to go out for a short time, instructing her to stay within the yard. Callie ran outside with her tricycle, and Judy planned to finish preparing the magazines and then take Callie to McDonald's after completing her delivery route. Judy stepped outside with the magazines, intending to call out to her daughter Callie, but Callie was nowhere to be seen. Judy looked around the yard, called out her daughter's name, but there was no response. She searched the yard and then the surrounding complex grounds, but Callie was gone. Usually, when Callie rode her tricycle, the creaking of its wheels was noticeable, but now there was silence. As Judy's panic grew, she began to cry out for her daughter, drawing the attention of the neighbors. They joined her in searching for Callie, but no one had seen Callie. The complex was heavily wooded, and a fence separated the houses from the nearby highway, making it unlikely that Callie could have wandered off on her own. Judy knew that Callie was only allowed to ride her tricycle in their yard, and Callie had always obeyed her mother before. It was also unlikely that Callie could have gone far on her small bike without being seen. With each passing minute, Judy's fears grew, and she decided to call the police. The officers arrived quickly and began a thorough search of the complex. As the search continued, officers went door to door, asking if anyone had seen Callie. Police suspected that Callie was still in the complex, and they believed the suspect was likely a resident of the complex. It would have been difficult for an outsider to get inside, kidnap Callie, and drive away without being noticed. To assist in the search, residents of the 300-apartment complex voluntarily allowed police to enter their homes. In case there was no one in the house, the complex manager used the spare key to search. Unfortunately, searching each apartment yielded no results. Callie and her bike were not found. After an all-night search, the case was reclassified as a kidnapping at around 4 a.m. A specialist unit took over the case, and detectives questioned Judy about possible enemies. They asked Judy if Callie's father was involved, but Judy ruled this out and said he had no motive. Detectives also asked if Judy had noticed anyone suspicious among the residents. She mentioned Mark, a 22-year-old man who had just moved in with his wife and young son. Judy noticed Mark's behavior was unusual. Judy and Mark spoke briefly a few times, and during one conversation, Mark commented that Callie was beautiful. Although Judy had heard similar comments from others, Mark's tone made her uncomfortable. What really caught her attention, however, was when Mark added that he had spied on all the little girls in the complex and that Callie was the most beautiful. Judy became increasingly wary of Mark after their conversations, and she made an effort to limit her interactions with him. Even though they still occasionally crossed paths in the yard. One conversation in particular raised her suspicions. Mark asked Judy if Callie would tell Judy if someone tried to touch her. Judy found this question alarming and quickly ended the conversation. As a result, she no longer allowed Callie to play with Mark's son, even when she was present. During her conversation with detectives, Judy recalled a detail that had previously seemed insignificant. When she was searching for Callie, she had asked Mark if he had seen Callie, and he claimed he did. Judy also noticed that Mark's sneakers were missing their laces, but at the time, she was too worried about Callie to think much of it. The detectives brought Mark in for questioning, and he denied any involvement in Callie's disappearance. He even agreed to take a polygraph test, which he passed. However, Judy's own account provided Mark with an alibi, as she had seen him on the playground with his son at the time she was searching for Callie. The police also searched Mark's apartment but found no sign of Callie or her bicycle. As a result, Mark was no longer considered a suspect, and the investigation continued without any leads. The police investigation into Callie's disappearance began by questioning her mother, Judy, as a standard procedure. Judy cooperated fully, answering all their questions, but she found it distressing that the police were focusing so much on her when they had no other leads. As the search for Callie continued, the case received widespread attention, with news reports, billboards, and flyers throughout the city. The police received over 1,000 of tips, but unfortunately, each one led to a dead end, and the case remained unsolved for months. Despite the lack of progress, Judy remained hopeful that her daughter would be found alive. She quit her job to devote all her time to the search, printing and posting flyers, contacting media outlets, and working tirelessly to keep the case in the public eye. With the help of some compassionate supporters, she was able to raise $100,000 as a reward for any useful information. Judy's efforts led to national television coverage, including appearances on The Oprah Winfrey Show and a popular TV show about unsolved crimes. Judy also partnered with local businesses to distribute flyers in their offices, establishments, and on commercial vehicles. She even convinced 2 airlines to include the flyers in ticket envelopes. Although these efforts generated new leads, the police were unable to make any significant progress in solving the case. The turning point in the case occurred when a woman called the police on August 9, 1996 to report a serious argument with her husband. She was tired of his strange behavior and wanted a divorce. In an attempt to persuade her to stay, the husband confessed to a shocking crime: he had killed Callie. The woman was stunned and immediately called 911 and revealed her husband's identity to the police. The husband's name is none other than Mark Christie, Judy's neighbor. However, the detectives faced a significant obstacle. Under state law, any information shared between spouses was protected and inadmissible in court. This meant that even if Mark's confession was true, the police couldn't use it as evidence to arrest or question him. Furthermore, Mark had been in his yard with his child shortly after Callie's disappearance, and his apartment had been searched early in the investigation, making it unlikely that he had the opportunity to kidnap and kill her. The detective in charge of the case, Detective Crow, decided to talk to Mark after hearing his wife's story. Mark and his family had moved out of the complex just weeks after Callie went missing due to serious allegations. Mark had been accused by the two girls' parents of standing naked in front of his house, which made the detective suspicious. Although no investigation had been launched, the incident appeared to be suspicious. Crow traveled to Mark's new home, 50 miles from Rochester, but encountered resistance. Mark's mother opened the door and said her son would not talk to the police without an attorney present. Mark learned about his wife calling the police and contacted a lawyer. This meant that the police could not use Mark's confession to his wife as evidence, and his lawyer could prevent any questioning. Despite this, Crow persisted. While talking to Mark's mother, Mark appeared and Crow persuaded him to answer some questions about Callie's case. Crow suggested they discuss the matter over coffee at a nearby restaurant. Mark agreed to Crow's surprise, but only on the condition that Crow would then take him to see his lawyer. Crow and Mark stopped at a nearby Italian restaurant. Crow tried to engage in the conversation normally, avoiding any pressure or tense questions. This approach seemed to work as Mark began to open up more while they waited for their food. Mark expressed deep remorse for his actions towards Callie and explained that her image had haunted him for the past 2 years, constantly appearing on news reports and flyers. Crow tried not to scare Mark. Crow had spoken to Mark before in the early stages of the investigation. But this new conversation felt different. Crow believed that Mark was feeling proud of having avoided capture, so Crow decided to appeal to Mark's ego. Crow told Mark that Mark was actually smarter than the entire investigation team, and Mark responded by saying that he didn't want to sound boastful, but his method of handling the bike was actually very smart. Mark offered to share details about how he got rid of the bike, but only on the condition that Mark wouldn't discuss anything else. Crow maintained a friendly and non-threatening tone, reassuring Mark that he was in control of the conversation and could share as much or as little as he wanted. Mark said that Callie's tricycle had been in his apartment 3 days after she went missing. Mark knew that the police would probably search every apartment without a warrant when a child was in danger, but Mark found a loophole in the law. Although police could search for a missing child, they were not allowed to search for physical evidence. This meant they could only test spaces that were large enough for a child to fit. To hide the bike, Mark decided to disassemble it and hide the bike's parts in small and hard-to-reach areas of his apartment. He wrapped some parts in clothes and put them in the closet, and put other parts in small bags and took them out to the car. He then dumped the pieces in various locations far from home. Meanwhile, the police were stationed at the exit of the complex, checking each car, but since they were only looking for Callie, the small bags containing the bike parts did not arouse any suspicions. Detective Crow saw an opportunity to get a full confession from Mark. Crow took a sympathetic approach, suggesting that Callie's death may have been an accident and not Mark's fault. Mark asked about the sentence he could face, and Crow estimated it could be about 25 years. Mark felt this was unfair, as it meant he had to spend half his life in prison and away from his family. He also mentioned that he had lived with guilt for 2 years, implying that this should be taken into account when sentencing. Despite Mark's questionable logic, Crow continued to encourage Mark to confess, suggesting it would bring him relief. Mark agreed to tell the truth, but only after consulting with a lawyer. Crow knew that Mark's lawyer would advise Mark against confessing to a crime without solid evidence. So, Crow decided to be straightforward with Mark, explaining that if he didn't tell the truth, Callie's parents would never know what happened to their daughter. Mark responded by saying that Callie hadn't suffered. Crow senses that Mark was confessing and encourages him to do the right thing. Mark looked at Crow and finally admitted to his actions. He repeated that Callie hadn't suffered, and Mark confessed to strangling her with his bare hands. He then added that he hadn't done anything else to her. Mark recounted the events of that evening, explaining that Callie had come to his apartment and asked to play with his 1.5-year-old son. Mark let her in and took her bike to the kitchen. Aware that Callie's mother wouldn't approve of her visiting, Mark let Callie go upstairs to play with the child without drawing Judy's attention to the situation. However, when Mark heard Judy calling out for her daughter in the yard about 10 minutes later, he panicked. He knew that Judy would be furious if she discovered that he had let Callie into his house without permission. In a moment of desperation, Mark went upstairs to the children's room and strangled Callie with his bare hands. Detective Crow was skeptical about certain aspects of Mark's story from the start. It seemed more plausible that Mark had lured Callie into his apartment under false pretenses, taking advantage of his wife's absence at work. Once inside, Mark might have attempted to molest Callie, but when he heard Judy calling out for her daughter, he may have panicked and killed Callie to avoid being exposed. Crow recalled that Judy had seen Mark wearing sneakers without laces, which suggested that he had used them to strangle Callie. This detail implied premeditation, contradicting Mark's claim that the crime was spontaneous. To avoid raising Mark's suspicions, Crow decided to continue listening to his story. Mark claimed that after the murder, he left Callie's body in the kitchen and took his son outside to establish an alibi. He deliberately allowed Judy to see him in the playground, hoping to deflect any suspicion. Once Judy began searching the complex, Mark returned home and hid Callie's body in a laundry basket, covering it with clothes. A short time later, he placed the basket in the trunk of his car. Mark confessed that the chaos of the search, with many people looking for Judy's daughter, allowed him to carry out these actions unnoticed. Mark took his son and drove to the building where he worked as a security guard. He parked near the back, left the basket with Callie's body by the door, and then entered the building through the main entrance, telling his co-workers he had forgotten something at work. His toll didn't raise any suspicions. So he made his way to the back door, which he opened from the inside, and retrieved the basket. Mark then climbed onto a large tank containing liquid coolant, opened the top, and dropped Callie's body into it after tying a heavy metal object to her. He got rid of Callie's clothes but left her earrings on. After disposing of the body, Mark returned home and joined the neighbors in searching for Callie. By doing so, he had already removed the body from the complex before the police became involved, and no one suspected anything. At the end of his confession, Mark expressed regret for killing Callie, stating it was a mistake. Crow paid for their food, and Mark left a $2 tip before willingly going with Crow to the police station, where he was arrested for murder. When Mark's lawyer found out about the confession, he attempted to retract it, but the attempt was unsuccessful. This was because Mark had provided the information willingly, and Detective Crow had followed proper procedures. As a result, the police went to Mark's workplace, opened the tank, and made a gruesome discovery. Even after 2 years, the victim's body was still inside. Due to the advanced state of decomposition, experts were unable to determine the cause of death or gather any further information. They confirmed the identity of the remains, which was none other than Callie. Mark admitted his guilt to the judge and received a minimum 25-year prison sentence, just as Detective Crow had predicted. Although Mark's lawyer managed to have the kidnapping charges dropped, he was still convicted of murder. However, Mark's case took a surprising turn in 2010. The police reopened a 1988 case involving the brutal murder of 74-year-old Viola Manville, who was killed while walking in a Rochester suburb. At the time, Mark was just 16 years old and was considered a suspect, but he passed a polygraph test, showing no signs of deception. As a result, another man, Frank Sterling, was arrested and eventually confessed to the crime after a lengthy overnight interrogation. Years later, Frank tried to appeal his sentence, claiming that the police had coerced his confession and that he was disoriented by the end of the interrogation. However, his appeals were unsuccessful until 2010, when the case was reopened and new evidence was sent to the lab. DNA analysis revealed the suspect's DNA matched not Frank's, but Mark Christie's. Mark, 39 at the time, admitted to murdering Viola in 2011 and received an additional 28 years in prison. Despite his confession, he showed no remorse and never revealed his motives for the crime. Meanwhile, Frank was finally released from prison after 19 years of wrongful imprisonment. He went on to sue the authorities and was awarded nearly $10 million in 2014. However, his life was cut short when he died of a heart attack in 2017 at the age of 54. Mark is currently serving his sentence in prison, but he may be eligible for parole in the near future. It's unclear whether he will be released, and his case serves as a reminder of the importance of thorough investigations. If the investigators had not mistakenly focused on Frank and coerced a false confession, Mark might have been caught earlier and possibly prevented from committing another crime, the murder of Callie. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery, the case of Sarah Foxwell. Sarah Foxwell was born on May 18, 1998, in Salisbury, Maryland, into a large family with 2 sisters and 4 brothers. Her mother had 3 additional children from a previous marriage. After her parents divorced, Sarah's mother struggled to care for her children alone. She worked long hours, so the children often stayed with relatives. As the middle child, Sarah played a peacemaking role, usually managing to bring her siblings together despite their frequent arguments. In December 2009, 11-year-old Sarah temporarily moved in with her aunt and grandparents, who lived in a spacious farmhouse on the outskirts of Salisbury. The kids loved visiting their aunt's home, which offered plenty of room to play. On December 22, 2009, the whole family was filled with joy and excitement, eagerly awaiting the upcoming Christmas day. After a pizza dinner, they began getting ready for bed around 9 p.m. Sarah shared a room with her 6-year-old sister, Emma, at the end of the hallway near the back door. The sisters chatted for a bit before falling asleep. The next morning, Sarah's grandfather went to wake the kids, but only found Emma in the room. He searched the entire house, thinking Sarah might have already gotten up, but couldn't find her anywhere. He informed Sarah's aunt, and together they thoroughly searched every room and corner of the house. When they couldn't find Sarah, her aunt suggested she might have gone outside to play in the snow, but her shoes and jacket were still at home. Then, her aunt noticed that Sarah's toothbrush was missing from the bathroom. After searching the surrounding area and finding no Sarah, her aunt called Sarah's mother, who rushed over. They then contacted the police, who arrived quickly and began searching the house. Sarah's aunt explained that she always checked the doors and windows every night before bed, including the previous evening, and the police couldn't find any signs of Sarah inside or nearby. When they learned about the missing toothbrush, the officers considered the possibility of an abduction, thinking the kidnapper might have taken the toothbrush before leaving with Sarah. They then decided to verify if all the doors and windows were indeed locked as Sarah's aunt had claimed. As investigators approached the back door next to Sarah's room, they found it unlocked, despite her aunt's insistence that it had been locked the night before. This discovery raised suspicions, since the family kept a spare key outside, which was now missing. The fact that the perpetrator knew about the spare key shows that he was very familiar with this family. Furthermore, the family's dog, which normally barked at strangers, had remained silent that night. The police launched a massive search operation, fearing that Sarah might have been kidnapped. News of her disappearance spread quickly, prompting many local residents to contact the police and offer their assistance. The police chief has made a public appeal through the media, asking people to check their cameras for any suspicious activity. Dozens of local police officers joined the search, with assistance from neighboring town police departments and police from other states. The police were hopeful that they would find Sarah alive, as the perpetrator had taken her toothbrush, which could indicate that they intended to keep her alive. With this in mind, the police dedicated all their resources to the search. Outside the house, investigators found their first clue, fresh tire tracks in the snow, suggesting the kidnapper had arrived by car. Since Sarah's warm clothing was still at home, it was unlikely the kidnapper had taken her on foot. Meanwhile, at the police station, Sarah's family was in for a surprise. Her 6-year-old sister, Emma, who shared a room with Sarah, whispered to their grandmother that she had seen the person who took Sarah. Emma claimed she had woken up to a man talking to Sarah, but pretended to be asleep, unsure of what was happening. She then saw the man leave the room with Sarah. What Emma said next sent shockwaves through the family. She knew the man who took Sarah. It was Mr. Thomas, the ex-boyfriend of Sarah's aunt. A man named Thomas had a history of violence against women and girls. Despite his criminal record, he spent a lot of time at Aunt Sarah's house and the children got to know him. The police knew Thomas well because he had many criminal records. Thomas first went to prison at 18 for attacking a 12-year-old girl, but he was released early after just a few months. He was sentenced again for assaulting another minor, but he was released early once more, this time after serving 6 months due to good behavior. Thomas continued to exhibit violent behavior, including another assault for which he received a 6-month sentence. He also tried to assault a girl on the same day his wife returned home from the hospital with their newborn baby. His wife eventually divorced him and obtained a restraining order after he threatened to kill her and their daughter. In another disturbing incident, Thomas targeted 2 young girls sitting on a porch. He approached them, claiming he had been watching one of them play in the yard, and called her a wild girl. He then used a stick to hit her on the buttocks, prompting her to run inside and tell her mother about the attack. She recognized Thomas from the window and recalled seeing his face before she moved into the house. She had previously checked the local sex offender registry and found his photo listed. She immediately reported him to the police, and the case proceeded to court. However, Thomas avoided punishment for his actions. Before the trial, she was threatened not to mention that Thomas was a sex offender and had a previous conviction for sexual assault. A few months prior to Sarah's disappearance, Thomas was arrested again for breaking into a 24-year-old woman's bedroom at night, undressing, and masturbating beside her bed. He was released on bail after his arrest. Initially, Thomas hid his criminal past from Sarah's aunt, but she eventually discovered the truth. Despite this, Thomas managed to persuade her that the accusations against him were false and that he was innocent. Detectives are certain that Thomas was the person who kidnapped Sarah. This suspicion was reinforced by the fact that during his relationship with Sarah's aunt, he had spent an inordinate amount of time with Sarah, more so than with the other children in the household. At the time, this behavior didn't seem unusual, but now that Sarah is missing, it appears highly suspicious. To further investigate, the police visited Thomas's residence, a shed located on his parents' property just a few miles away. They brought him in for questioning and obtained a search warrant for the shed. Upon searching, they found it to be in disarray with poor living conditions, but no evidence linking Thomas to Sarah's disappearance was discovered. However, the police did find a large collection of adult magazines and DVDs, which filled the shed. During the interrogation, Thomas denied any involvement in Sarah's disappearance. He claimed that he was struggling with his own personal issues, specifically his tendency to commit crimes against underage girls. According to Thomas, he had made a conscious effort to avoid being alone with the children while dating Sarah's aunt in order to avoid any false accusations. When confronted with Emma's testimony, which placed him at the scene of the abduction, Thomas dismissed her account, stating that she had a history of fabricating stories and that he was not there on the night in question. Detectives were skeptical of Thomas's story. It wasn't just because of his prior convictions. As they questioned him about 11-year-old Sarah's disappearance, Thomas seemed to take pleasure in the situation, smiling and mocking the sheriff. Although it is certain that he planned the crime without any mistakes, the police still work hard to solve the case and find out the truth about what really happened. Thomas claimed to have a solid alibi, stating he was at a bar with a friend until late at night. However, investigators found a discrepancy in his story. Although he was indeed at the bar, he left around 1 a.m. and wasn't seen again until 7 a.m. the next morning. A review of his phone records revealed that he had sent messages to several women, proposing to meet up, but all of them declined. Despite the inconsistencies in Thomas's story, detectives still couldn't gather enough evidence to incriminate him. Their primary concern was finding Sarah, and they poured all their resources into the search. A search of Thomas's pickup truck yielded several crucial clues. Inside, they found Sarah's green toothbrush and a large lollipop, which suggested that Thomas might have used the candy to lure her into his vehicle. Furthermore, the tire tracks on his truck matched the ones found in the snow outside the house on the night of Sarah's disappearance. Thomas had lied about not visiting Aunt Sarah's house for more than a month. This did not deter the police and volunteers from continuing their search for Sarah. They searched extensively, covering many miles around her house, checking abandoned buildings, forests, ravines, and bodies of water. K-9 units and helicopters assisted in the search. The community provided immense support to the police efforts, with hundreds signing up to volunteer. The poor weather and upcoming holidays did not dampen the search, but unfortunately, the efforts yielded no results. The search party resumed early the next morning, with their numbers increasing rather than dwindling. Eventually, the number of volunteers swelled to 3,000 people. Due to the sheer volume of volunteers, the coordination center had to be relocated from the police station to a larger venue, the local baseball stadium. Many of the volunteers brought their children to assist, handing out essentials such as water, hot tea, and food. Despite the odds, the search continued with renewed determination to find Sarah alive. While investigators were questioning Thomas, they received another crucial piece of evidence. After he was brought to the station, his clothes were sent to the lab for analysis. Experts discovered foreign DNA on Thomas's underwear, which they compared to a DNA sample from Sarah's belongings. The results showed a complete match, leading detectives to a disturbing conclusion. It appeared that Thomas had sexually assaulted Sarah after abducting her. Despite the lack of progress in the search, thousands of people gathered on Christmas Day, December 25th, to continue looking for Sarah. Meanwhile, investigators obtained GPS data from Thomas's phone, which showed the cell towers his phone had connected to, although the exact locations were not provided. Police discovered that on the night Sarah vanished, her phone had connected to 3 cell towers, allowing them to narrow down the search area to a roughly triangular zone. Investigators focused on this location, located near the state border, about 8 miles from Sarah's aunt's home. The area was densely wooded, but hundreds of people thoroughly searched every inch of the territory, holding out hope for a Christmas miracle that Sarah would be found alive. Sadly, the outcome was far more tragic. Around 4 p.m., police discovered Sarah's body on the ground, near the state border. She was lying on her back with her arms raised upwards, pointing towards the sky. medical experts performed an autopsy and were shocked by what they discovered. They confirmed that Sarah had been sexually assaulted and showed signs of strangulation. Additionally, experts found dirt in Sarah's lungs, suggesting that the perpetrator had attempted to drown her in a puddle. During this torture, Sarah lost consciousness. The experts also found evidence that Sarah had suffered severe burns. It is believed that the perpetrator may have left her lying in the forest for some time, went to get gasoline, and then returned to set Sarah on fire. Significantly, traces of smoke were found in her lungs, indicating that she was still alive when the fire was set. This also explains why her hands were raised and pointing to the sky. Likely a reflex reaction to the fire. The sheer cruelty of these actions shocked and horrified everyone involved in the case, including the detectives. After reconstructing the case, the investigators' main goal is to ensure that the perpetrator, Thomas, receives the death penalty. Thomas continued to deny any involvement in Sarah's disappearance, but the evidence against him was substantial. After discovering Sarah's body, forensic experts found several strands of hair and pieces of fabric from Sarah's pajamas on the front seat of Thomas's pickup truck, further linking him to her kidnapping. Based on all the evidence, it is very unlikely that Thomas will escape punishment. The trial was delayed for over a year, but it never took place. In early 2011, the prosecution offered Thomas a plea deal. Under the terms of the agreement, Thomas would plead guilty and receive a life sentence, rather than facing the death penalty. While this deal may seem lenient considering Thomas's crimes, there were valid reasons for accepting it. A key consideration was that Sarah's younger sister would have to testify multiple times in court, facing the man who had murdered her sister. Sarah's kidnapping and murder were devastating for her family, and there was a risk that the trial's outcome might not bring them the justice they sought. Due to uncertainty about securing the death penalty, the prosecution presented a plea deal. This deal meant that Thomas would not receive the death penalty, and in return, he would plead guilty to the crime. The terms of the deal also ensured that Thomas would not be eligible for early release from prison. Another issue was that the state governor at the time opposed the death penalty. Ultimately, Thomas agreed to the deal and confessed to the detectives, revealing details they already knew. He admitted to tricking Sarah into leaving her house with him, then taking her away, sexually assaulting her, and killing her. As a result, Thomas received 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole and was transferred to a maximum security prison. During his initial days in prison, Thomas was assaulted by a fellow inmate with a homemade weapon during lunch, resulting in several severe lacerations. Despite the attack, Thomas survived and was later given increased protection by prison staff. The public was outraged by Sarah's case, which exposed repeated failures in Thomas's custody, allowing him to be released but continue to commit crime. Hi there, investigators. It's time to uncover the truth behind another case, the case of Doreen Herbert. Doreen Herbert was born on November 29, 1952, in California. She grew up in a very large family of 5 children. Her kindness and desire to help others defined her as a person. After college, she moved to San Francisco, where she worked as a physiotherapist. Doreen also nurtured a dream of creating her own large family. This aspiration became a reality when she met Michael Dennis, who worked near her clinic. They began dating, got married, and in 1976, their son Paul was born. Initially, Michael and Doreen were happy, but the birth of their child marked the beginning of their marital troubles. A year later, they decided to go their separate ways, with their son staying with Doreen and Michael receiving regular visitation rights. Doreen and her family were still able to maintain a fairly stable life despite the many hardships they faced. She met Charles, and they started dating, eventually getting married and settling in a quiet neighborhood in San Jose. They was thrilled when their daughter Diana was born in 1979. Charles was eager to be a father and was delighted to welcome Diana, raising her alongside Doreen's son from a previous relationship. Tragedy struck in February 1980 when disaster befell their young family. 4-year-old Paul slipped through the fence surrounding their backyard pool and fell into the water. Doreen, who was at home at the time, discovered what had happened too late. She immediately pulled Paul from the water and called for emergency services. Paul was rushed to the hospital and connected to life support, but after 10 agonizing days, the medical team concluded that he had no chance of recovery. The heartbreaking decision was made to disconnect Paul from life support. Doreen was heartbroken and consumed by guilt, despite the police investigation clearing her of any blame. However, with the help of her young daughter, she slowly began to heal. For years after the traumatic event, the family finally received some good news. After 2 previous miscarriages, Doreen became pregnant again, and this time, everything seemed to be going smoothly. They was expecting a baby boy, due to arrive in early November. Just days before Doreen's scheduled hospital visit, the family decided to participate in Halloween festivities. On the evening of October 31st, the neighborhood was filled with decorated homes, children trick-or-treating, and parents handing out candy. Diana, now 4 years old, was excited to join in and her parents agreed. Although Doreen was 9 months pregnant, she accompanied her daughter on the trick-or-treating adventure, while Charles stayed home to hand out candy to other children. Charles and his wife, Doreen, had returned home from taking their daughter trick-or-treating. Just before 9 p.m., noticing they were running low on candy, Charles decided to make a quick trip to the nearby store to restock. At around 8:50 p.m., he left the house, leaving his wife and daughter behind. 15 minutes later, he returned home to find the front door slightly ajar, which seemed suspicious. As he entered the house, he was met with a horrific scene. His wife, Doreen, lay on the floor in the corridor, surrounded by a large amount of blood and showed no signs of life. Charles immediately called 911. In the living room, he then found the body of their unborn child. Charles was in shock, struggling to comprehend what he was seeing. At first, he wondered if Doreen had had a miscarriage, but he quickly realized that something much more serious had happened. Next to their unborn child lay Doreen's best severed hand, making it clear to Charles that his family had been attacked. Fearing for his daughter's safety, he frantically searched for her. There was so much blood on the floor that he slipped and fell while running through the house. Eventually, he found his daughter hiding behind the sofa in the living room. She is still alive and unhurt. When paramedics arrived, they found Doreen's weak pulse and rushed her to the hospital. Tragically, Doreen did not survive and was pronounced dead in the ambulance. Her unborn child also did not survive. The attacker had inflicted severe injuries on the baby after removing it from Doreen's womb. A post-mortem examination revealed that Doreen had been stabbed multiple times with a long, sharp object, possibly a sword or machete. The crime scene was particularly disturbing, with blood covering the floors, walls, and ceiling. Police officers at the scene were deeply affected by what they witnessed. Despite a thorough search of the house, no signs of the perpetrator or any evidence were found. However, investigators did discover bloody footprints leading from the house to the middle of the road, suggesting that the killer may have escaped in a vehicle. Soon, investigators found another crucial piece of evidence on the lawn in front of the house, a wolf mask covered in blood. They believed it might belong to the killer, as Charles reported they didn't own such a mask. The evidence was sent to the laboratory for analysis. And police attempted to question Diana, who was the only witness in this incident. Although shaken and in complete shock, Diana provided valuable details about what happened. She explained that shortly after her father left for the store, someone knocked on their door. When Doreen answered, she saw a man wearing a wolf mask and holding a long blade. He threatened to kill her, and Doreen immediately screamed at Diana to run out of the house. Diana hid behind the sofa but couldn't recall what happened next until her father found her. Initially, the police found it suspicious that the victim's husband, Charles, had left for the store just minutes before the killer arrived. This coincidence led investigators to consider him as a potential suspect. When Charles returned home, he unknowingly stepped on blood multiple times, even falling and getting covered in it. Despite this, Diana was unable to help identify the attacker due to the wolf mask. Police initially considered the possibility that Charles might have intentionally gotten blood on his clothes to create an alibi. However, detectives quickly discovered several inconsistencies in this theory. Firstly, Charles's shoes did not match the bloody footprints found on the street. Secondly, the killer likely escaped in a car parked in front of the house, but no blood was found in Charles's vehicle, nor was a different pair of shoes discovered. To investigate further, police went to the store that Charles had visited that evening and spoke to the staff there. They confirmed that Charles had indeed purchased candy from him. This established an alibi for Charles, as he didn't have enough time to commit the murder. Surveillance footage from the store supported Charles's account, leading detectives to temporarily rule him out as the prime suspect. They then asked Charles if he knew of anyone who might want to harm his family. Charles immediately pointed out Michael, Doreen's ex-husband. According to Charles, Michael's behavior changed dramatically after the death of their son, who had drowned in the pool. Michael blamed Doreen for the boy's death, believing she had deliberately killed Paul to cut ties with him. Michael filed a lawsuit against his ex-wife Doreen, holding her responsible for the death of Paul, but lost the case. Their marriage had been troubled even before their divorce. After the birth of their son, Michael's behavior became increasingly erratic, often withdrawing into depression and distancing himself from his family. Doreen suspected that Michael's childhood traumas were to blame. As a child, Michael had hearing problems and wore a bulky hearing aid, which earned him constant teasing from his peers. This led to him growing up as an introvert with few friends and a fear of interacting with women. Although his relationship with Doreen seemed to have helped him overcome these issues, they eventually resurfaced and contributed to their decision to divorce. When Doreen married Charles, Michael began to resent her, particularly for the fact that another man was raising his son. These feelings became even worse after Paul's death, made Michael hate his ex-wife even more. Michael has also been unemployed for a long time, which had a significant impact on him. After considering this information, the detectives decided to visit Michael's house to speak with him. Although Charles's statement alone was not enough to make Michael the main suspect, the fact that Michael lived only 2 miles from Doreen's house prompted the detectives to pay him a visit immediately. The officers arrived at Michael's home around midnight and noticed a pickup truck parked near the garage. When police shined their flashlights on Michael's car, they saw blood on the steering wheel and keys. They knocked on the door, but no one answered. Lights were still on inside the house and they could hear running water, leading them to suspect that Michael might be destroying evidence or washing bloody clothes. They continued knocking until Michael opened the door. Michael remained calm, even after being informed Doreen's murder. Michael answered the officers' questions calmly and allowed them to enter his house without a warrant. He claimed that he had gone to the store earlier that day, returned home, and hadn't left since. He even agreed to sign a form allowing the police to search his home. However, as he reached for the pen to sign, officers noticed a deep cut on his right hand. Michael explained that he had accidentally cut himself while carving a pumpkin for Halloween, but the police were skeptical of his story. The wound was fresh, with blood still seeping out. As officers searched the house, Michael accompanied one of them upstairs to retrieve his ID. However, when Michael reached for the bed headboard, the officer intervened, sensing suspicious behavior. Why would Michael store his documents behind the bed? Curiosity led the police to conduct a deeper investigation. Upon approaching the bed, they spotted a holster attached to the headboard, containing a loaded gun. The officer confiscated the weapon and escorted Michael downstairs to the other officers. Meanwhile, the officers discovered a trail of blood droplets leading from the house to the garage. And they found a washing machine and a pile of clothes with bloodstains. This evidence is enough to arrest Michael. A thorough search of the house by detectives and forensic experts followed, seeking evidence that might link Michael to the murder. Although the blood analysis would take a few days, the police made some disturbing discoveries. They found an empty box for an 18-inch machete. Medical experts confirmed that the wounds from this knife matched the actual wounds found on Doreen's body. During the investigation, police found 2 makeshift coffins in Michael's house, leading them to believe that he was planning to harm his ex-wife, Doreen, and her husband. The presence of medical body bags at his home was also suspicious. As detectives pieced together the evidence, they went to a judge to request a warrant for Michael's arrest. However, due to a lack of concrete evidence, they were initially only able to hold him for a limited time. When the judge refused to issue an arrest warrant, citing insufficient circumstantial evidence to convict Michael, he was released from prison. But detectives eventually got vital information from the autopsy results. Experts discovered that the crime scene had blood from 2 individuals. One blood type was identified as Doreen's, and the other was Michael's. This evidence suggested that Michael had likely injured himself while attacking Doreen. With this new evidence, the judge quickly issued a warrant for Michael's arrest, charged him with the murder of Doreen and her unborn child. In addition, detectives discovered that Michael owned a wolf mask identical to the one found near Doreen's house the previous Halloween. Further inquiry revealed that Michael had worn the mask to a party, and a photograph of him wearing it was even obtained by police. To validate this, detectives searched Michael's home and found the same clothing he wore in the photo. To search for new clues to the case, the police interviewed Doreen's neighbors about the incidents that happened that night. Several children who were trick-or-treating reported seeing a man wearing a wolf mask standing across from Doreen's house, eyeing it intensely. This sighting occurred around 7 p.m., a full 2 hours before the murder. Michael's trial commenced in July 1988, 4 years after the crime. He initially pleaded guilty but later changed his plea to not guilty by reason of insanity. A psychologist evaluated Michael and diagnosed him with severe mental health issues. Michael claimed that the horror of Halloween was too much to bear, as the sight of children trick-or-treating reminded him of his own loss and triggered a mental breakdown. He alleged that this breakdown led him to visit Doreen's house armed with a machete on the evening of the murder. When Doreen opened the door, Michael revealed his true identity as the man behind the mask and made a shocking statement: she killed their son. Recognizing the man as Michael, Doreen quickly screamed for her daughter to run and Michael immediately attacked her. Michael claimed he was unaware that Doreen was pregnant at the time of the attack, but this assertion was met with skepticism. Doreen was visibly pregnant, standing at 4 feet 1 inches tall, and her friends found it hard to believe that Michael wouldn't have noticed, especially given her prominent belly. In fact, her friends joked that her pregnancy had made her almost as wide as she was tall. The prosecution argued that Michael was fully aware of his actions and had planned the crime in advance, a claim supported by evidence from the investigation. Detectives discovered that Michael had previously shared his desire to kill his ex-wife and her husband with friends, and had even discussed disposing of their bodies in the bay. The presence of 2 coffins and body bags in his home suggested that he was serious about carrying out this plan, and the prosecution argued that he had adjusted his intentions for some reason to target Doreen instead. Michael may have panicked or feared being caught, prompting him to leave the house quickly. During the trial, Doreen's 9-year-old daughter, Diana, testified about what she witnessed. Charles had wanted to spare his daughter the traumatic experience, but she was the only witness to the crime. The trial lasted a year, ultimately resulting in Michael's conviction for the murders of Doreen and her unborn child. Michael was sentenced to death, but a moratorium on the death penalty in California delayed his execution. As a result, Michael remains in prison, and his sentence will be no carried out. Years later, Diana revealed that the murder had such a profound effect on her, and she could never forget the horror she witnessed. Ultimately, Diana decides to forgive Michael and try to move past the past to focus on the future.